We are live. Welcome everyone to the show. Let's wait and see if the laptop catches up, and I can start by welcoming all of you to the channel. Welcome Zane, underachieving watch collector, Kenneth, pilot style, Peter Smith. I hope the laptop's catching up. Good, we are in. And now what's going on the screen? Let's see if I can fix this quickly. Full screen, there we go, we're in. Sweet. Okay, welcome all of you. Thank you all so much for joining. Carl, Blue Shirt, Jenks, Orange Hand. Great to have you all here. This is going to be a bit of a different format. We see that it's not wrist shot week. It's a bit of a different approach. Going to be doing a more philosophical talk instead of the first, the usual format that people have become accustomed to seeing. This is how the channel actually began. The live shows began in a very simple way of just me doing asking random questions and getting feedback from all of you. So the idea is we can all sit back, relax, engage a lot more. I can actually address you in the comments. You can ask questions. I can pull up watches and we keep chatting and getting the dialogue along the way. So it's always a joy. Curtis, Maynard, there's so many of you here. Welcome all 47 of you who are already watching. It's a pleasure. First, we must start by congratulating SpaceX. It's incredible. They have done such a good job and it was an amazing launch, right? Yeah, and now we're going to be going back in time to talk about watches of the 50s and how those designs really influenced what we see today. So it should be a great talk. I've put a bit of thought into the preparation, but not so much. Okay, let's start by, how did we normally know? Okay, so we began these shows back in the day with the Live 5. This, I think I started at the beginning of this year, an attempt to get the ball rolling and get me thinking about watches a little bit more. So we have a selection of 5 pieces that begin the show. And saying hi to all of you again in the chats. There's so many. Mark, I see Teo saying, glad I finally made one of these. Oh, it's great having you. Sadly, it's not wrist shot week. It's a bit of a different approach, but this is really how the live stream started well over a year ago. And there was, I think, someone actually left a question. I think Thomas, welcome. You mentioned the guy who actually asked the question of if we're ever going to have another one of these talks again. So yeah, we've got it. Should be a lot of fun. We're going to enjoy ourselves. That Breguet on the thumbnail would look better without photo patina. Yeah, Boozer, I must say. And in the middle here, I've got a Type 21. So let's just start. Let's get the ball rolling. I don't know how long the show is going to be. Might be 2.5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours, who knows. Got coffee, whiskey, water, got the full package. I'm going to start by dropping all of the names of the watches that are on the screen into the chat now. And you should be able to see it. So if you're interested in any of the pieces from left to right, you can follow up and get a better understanding for our stream confirmed, for sure, pilot style. You can get a better understanding of the references as I talk through them. For the first time, we featured Rolex on the page. And I would say this discussion really stemmed from the show, the video that came out this week on reissue dive watches. I really loved it. It was so much fun to put together. Just looking at this entirely new / old genre that has surged, and people are enjoying it too. That the whole new area that these watches have gone into, and this is kind of where this area sits in a way. And we think it might be nice to just break down the elements that made 50s watches so unique. And I've done a little write-up to give us a better description. Yeah, should be a great time. Megan Arthur, welcome to the show. I think you are James, founder Timeless Capital's daughter. Welcome, pleasure having you here. I really hope James is doing well. I need to follow up again on my phone. I've been so bad with keeping up with everyone. Chi-Town, Chip Gage, so many of you who are joining. It's such a pleasure having you all here. Thank you. So we're going to start with the basics. Let's just run through the 5 pieces on screen, get me warmed up, and then we can get into the topic at hand. So on the left, we have a JLC Master Memovox, it's called. It's going to take a little bit of time for me to get used to doing this again. It's been such a long time since I've actually presented a show off the cuff instead of having like a scheduled format, The nice thing about the wrist shot week show is that we just scroll through watches and it's easy. This way, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm sure you'll see as we progress. But I have never seen a Master Memovox spoken about enough. I've never actually seen it shown. I haven't seen Watchbox premiering it. I don't know if they're popular. I don't know if it was a limited edition. Feels like quite a tribute piece. Ping Pong asking, Rolex sub, date or no date? I'm a no date person. I'm actually, as of right now, I'm preparing a video on no date watches. It'll be coming out Tuesday, I hope. A bit of a 5 reasons why you should enjoy no date watches. But this is such a gorgeous Memovox. Not just the blue dial, the radiant effect, but the batons and everything. It's so much cleaner and simpler. And this really does call back to the original. The reason why these pieces are all on the screen is because they do have some kind of reference to 50s inspired designs in one way or another. But this piece really does represent the original Memovoxes from back in the day, before they got really bloated up. And I just love the color combination and the pairing. And then next to it, we have Sheer Butte, which is the IWC Mark 11. Great history, great story. And yeah, it's going to be cool to, I've got a few surprises up my sleeve in the next few weeks for all of you. I won't drop the bomb here yet, but let's just say it's linked to 50s inspired designs as well. Next up, we have a Breguet Type 21, and this is a flyback chronograph. Breguet Type 20, we can definitely talk about more in this discussion. And if you would like to reach out to me, tag me at IDGuy in the chat. I'll be able to see your comment a lot faster, get to your question. And yeah, the whole idea behind this is that we can jump between comparing watches, talking about designs and elements. That's really how this live show got its footing back in the day. It's pretty funny. And then we have a 5513. Now, it looks so much like a 14060, but this must have been the very, very last reference of the 5513, just as it was transitioning across. So it has a sapphire crystal, but you can see it has a gold, white gold insert around the batons and the plots. 2 lines of text. I mean, no date Submariner. I always bring it up somewhere along the line. And then we have a Speedmaster 57, not the 57 reissue, but they call it, it's the coaxial Speedmaster 57 with 2 subdials. And I find it to be quite an interesting piece. Without the 3rd subdial, it looks nicely balanced, well proportioned, a little bit less cluttered and busy, if you know what I mean. The George Clooney, apparently, yeah, I remember seeing some advertising. He wears this riding a motorbike, I think. This is one of his favorites. Very good points. That was from Ant. Okay, so here's the live 5. It's very simple, basic. I'll leave it on the screen for a sec as I catch up with all of you here. For all of you who are still joining, welcome, everyone. Let's see, Blue Shirt Type 20 is one of my most favorite designs. I thought it was nice to feature it on the front. It kind of links up to what we're talking about, 50s pieces. The funniest thing is that the Type 20, the whole aesthetic of the Type 20 really came from German watches, which is going to be great to talk about one day soon. When I'm talking about the watches of French armed forces, it's amazing how much German influence really played a part in how watches developed from the 40s onwards. Yeah, so good. So let's close this and just talk about what I'm wearing currently. Thought I'd bring it up for a change. This is the only wrist shot you'll see on the show. So what happened was I got in touch with Eddie from Time Factors. He knows I love Smith's watches. He sent me a few, and a part of the few, this is one of 4 pieces that I received. This is called the PRS 29, which is, and it's quite fitting, it's a tribute to Longines and Omega pieces that were supplied to British Armed Forces during the Second World War, but also transitioned across into the 1950s. And I can actually find the heritage watch that this mirrors as well. But I really like the idea that you say, so how would Smiths address this? So he's put the vintage logo on it. The thing that really completes this watch for me, the blued hands. It's unreal. So it's 37 millimeters in size, has a manual wind ETA movement, really nice and thin. I put it on a Tessuflex bracelet, which is my absolute favorite. And this combination, I don't think will ever change. I think this is how it's going to stay from now on. And I'm trying to work out some kind of arrangement with Eddie where I'm able to keep these watches and talk about them more because, yeah, it's just, these watches need to be discussed more, really. For what they're offered at, the value, the quality, I think they are sublime. As most of you know, I love the Smiths Everest. That's my one and only. But now I have a few more to show off and, yeah, a little bit of retro revival fun. And since we're talking about this, I can quickly pull up the Longines variant of this model. That is, they call the Heritage Military. Now, you're going to have to forgive me because I'm going to have to get my hand used to using a magic mouse again. And as I zoom in, so the screen decides to shrink and stuff. But I hope you get a good idea of the piece itself. So this is pretty much a scaled up variant of a piece that was issued in and around the Second World War. And let me just get the other model up again for you. This is going to take some time, so bear with me as I slowly but surely warm up on the show. So what happened was these were then issued to RAF pilots as well. And it's amazing how they generally call these Mark 7s. And we then transitioned from the Mark 7s to the Mark 11, which, as we've just seen, the IWC Mark 11. And then we get to the Smiths W10, and there's just so much nice development that went on. The history of British military watches, great to study. But there was mention about blued hands. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, that just sells it to me. Honestly, if this watch was just a white dial with silver hands, it wouldn't appeal to me whatsoever. With a cream dial and blued hands, proper heat-treated blued hands, it just makes a world of difference. The photos don't do it justice. And the bracelet, I see Carl saying he likes the bracelet. This is called a Tessuflex bracelet. I don't know if anyone's heard of it before, but Tessuflex was a very popular name back in the day. It's faded into obscurity. I've never heard anyone talk about it, but it's basically a bracelet that consists entirely of springs that keep it together. And it's the most comfortable bracelet under the sun. They're probably, the reason why they went out of business was because they were probably stupidly expensive to manufacture because they are so technical. I mean, if I zoom in, let me make this full screen again for you. Again, ladies and gentlemen, bear with me as I try and get an understanding of how to use this again. It's a lot more activity from my side. But this bracelet is amazing and it pairs so well. It feels like a watch of that time period, you know? Anyway, going to stop gushing over this. There's plenty of reviews coming soon that I'll be talking and sharing all of those details. So the thinking of this next, okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to close this, open up a PDF page and begin the discussion. Let's pull up this shot, which I prefer a bit more. I'm going to leave this on the screen just so you have something cool to look at while I read through this little list or note that I made. And I'm just referring back to my laptop screen to see that everything's in order and it's not too much of a mess. Oh, geez, it's so funny, me getting myself prepared and getting in line. Blued hands are amazing, Megan, I agree. They are gorgeous. Magic Mouse is my rodent. It sure is. But this is the Magic Trackpad. It's supposedly, I mean, it's great. It does a good job, but sometimes it really does, you know, get in the way. My hands are also quite cold, so I'm getting them warmed up. But how are all of you? I hope you're all well and keeping yourselves busy, happy, occupied, working hard, just enjoying the weekend. I think that's pretty important. Okay, so I'm missing a lot of you in the chats. This is going to be a kind of like a jump between chats and the show itself. So bear with me, as always. So 1950s watch design. Let's try and get ourselves into that time period and understand the setting. Climate. What actually happened? Well, World War II ended. Lots of, what's the word? Reparation was happening. And it really dawned, a new time period dawned from it, you know? The nuclear age began, so new potential suddenly arrived. And Kenneth saying, nice weather in Florida for the launch. Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it was really good. Amazing how quick it launched. Really congratulate SpaceX. I think I said that already in the beginning. So as we dawn, and I'm going to try and pull this up a bit closer so you can maybe see a bit better on the screen. Again, this is what I could slap together before the show began. I hope it's okay, and you can read what's going on the screen. So World War II ended, new time period. It's a whole new era, the nuclear age we arrived at. And because of that, we started seeing a resurgence of new contracts being opened and companies becoming more and more, in demand for various aspects and elements. I think what's amazing about the whole development of watches during this time was that with any kind of technology, I think, I've said this once in a video, something like desperation sparks innovation. I think that's such a good trend. That's such a good thing that you can possibly incorporate into things that happen in life. Desperation sparks innovation. So a lot of the times, if you refer back to the First World War, when you think what happened prior to and then after, what came out of that war, we had navies, we had submarines, tanks. In the beginning, it was horse-drawn carriages, and everything changed, all the technology with regards to chemicals, engineering, manufacturing. And the same thing happened here. Great change. And Good evening, Truth Fears. Great to have you. Maine is saying the bracelet looks phenomenal on the watch. Might have to get one for my Vulcan Cricket. Have a look. They are hard to find. I think it's an American-made brand, Tessuflex. I'll put it into the chat for all of you. You can find some great bargains on eBay if you're lucky. Try and find like mint condition ones if you can, which come in little display cases and everything. It's amazing. They really are incredible to wear. So after the Second World War, arriving in the nuclear age, the technology that improved, all of that, how that all changed. But then I think this is the most important element. I'll highlight it here, maybe if I can. Competition began to rise again. And by that, I mean, instead of collaboration, Axis and allies, everyone working together when it comes to creating and supplying each other with tools and utilities, we think of the Dirty Dozen and all of those watches back then. Competition began to rise and industry needed to start all over again. They had to take center stage and start working. So you see that in this competitive phase, these companies were vying for the top position. And yeah, it was a different change, a completely new dawn, really. And it's like a clean slate suddenly happened. Everyone was now back in action and starting to work hard at what they were trying to push. And if we refer to the designs, I hope you can see this okay. Let me maybe shrink this so we don't have, no, come back. So we don't have extra text in the way. It's been so long since I've last done one of these presentations. So what happened to the designs? How did that really change the hemisphere? Well, we started seeing almost a resurgence of 1930s inspirations again. I've spoken about it before, actually. More curvaceous forms. We started seeing a bit more stylization. There wasn't, in the beginning at least, there wasn't so much focus on function anymore until we transitioned into later periods. But the applications changed as technologies did. And by that I mean, this is the second line, we started seeing dive watches become popular. We started seeing actual utility watches become important, being used in all sorts of new areas. I think dive watches are probably the best to talk about because they really did make a huge impact at the time. And then the next step was design for purpose and functional focus, as in what did they need to do? How would they fulfill that application? And we can say the same thing about Flieger watches, how they transitioned into field pieces. Can talk about those as well. And we're referring back to streamlined manufacturing and use of simplified forms. Back in the day, there was, after the Second World War, money was quite tight. Everything was still being rebuilt. So they had to think about how to get the best bang per buck when it came to making things and how best could they execute it. And because of that, they decided to make the processes simpler. I mean, my favorite time was the making of the Fender Stratocaster during this period, where everything was just bolted together. The Telecaster and the Stratocaster, everything was just thrown together and assembled very simply and easily. And the use of simplified forms, which we can refer to now as we get into pieces. But that was basically my shtick for the beginning of the show, just to get me at least into the mindset of talking about 50s inspired pieces. And yeah, we're A for away. So I don't know how long that took, 18 minutes. So for those of you who've logged in to join after the fact, you've basically heard my spiel about watch designs of the 50s and what happened in that time period. And so we can now get into talking about the designs in a bit more detail and just enjoy the conversation. If you'd like to ask me some questions, the Broadmaster, Raymond, that's a cool piece. Ask me questions about the pieces, what you would like compared, what you think of X, Y, Z. We let it roll. I really like this idea that I can actually sit back and try to talk to you as much as possible for a change. 50 Fathoms is one of the most influential and iconic pieces for sure, Tippy. I think I had it open. No, I don't have a slot open. Let me get one here for us. And the idea is now we can just let it roll. Bear in mind that I haven't used this format in a long, long time. So formats might, the whole Safari browser might have changed. It doesn't seem very cooperative when it comes to zooming into stuff. So I hope you can see it all okay. Get a good visual of everything on the screen as I talk to you guys. So Panerai, Shaitan saying, like it or not, Panerai and Rolex wrote the book on successful divers. I mean, they really did. I think Blancpain also made a big splash. is extremely important when we think of that history. And let's try and pull up some vintage pieces, actually. That's the real bonus of working this format, is that we can really focus in on anything we want and talk about it with a visual aid. Oh, geez. As I zoom in, so this decides to shrink itself. I hope it's okay. Let me know if you can see this all fine on the screen and it's not too shrunken down. Sadly, that's as good as it zooms in. Come on, man. Why can't it work better than that? So yeah, I definitely don't want to pull up separate articles, but that'll just take way too much time away from everything. But let's have a look and catch up with what's going on. I see Thomas is having a conversation with Megan. Captain Cook, yes, absolutely, Shashank. We can talk about that now. A lot of 50s designs looked as if they were moving at 100 miles per hour, referring back to streamlining, for sure, absolutely. And I see Forbin saying, I'd rather listen to me instead of those gushy commenters of SpaceX. Oh, geez, Forbin, I had to mute it at one stage. I think that the PR gets a little bit excessive. Huh? That was a bit too much. I mean, it's all well and good just seeing what's going on, but having to hear what's going on all the time too got a bit excessive, for sure. So yeah, I see a comment about the Zodiac Seawolf. I'm just wetting the palate with a coffee. I'll be with you in a second. So talking about the Blancpain 50 fathoms, or Blancpain, however we want to say it. These watches, used by military forces before commercial divers were really a thing. Could say the same about Panerai, which I should bring up, actually. I had the Super Ocean on the screen. I really want to talk about this watch. Now, sadly, when I zoom in, actually, if I hold it on the screen, will that work? I don't know. I'm holding my hands open to keep this zoomed in. Okay, I'm going to leave this here and get back to the 50, but Panerai is another watch that I think we need to refer to. Do we want a Submariner on the screen? Not really. Let's get out of the Submariner and pull up a Panerai. And we should use not the Radiomir, but the Luminor. And just another detail that I think is important for everyone. I should have actually mentioned this in the beginning. But if I just name drop a few watches that came out at the time, listen to this. So these are the watches that debuted in the 50s. Are you ready for this list? Rolex Submariner, Rolex GMT, Rolex Explorer, Rolex Day-Date, Omega Seamaster, Omega Speedmaster, Omega Railmaster, JLC Memovox, Blancpain 50 Fathoms, Aqualung, Panerai Luminor, Breitling Navitimer, Breguet Type 20. I mean, that's just not even a handful. But you hear those names and you think that is pretty much exactly what everyone likes nowadays in the modern sports space, which is really where the whole discussion stemmed from. I just find it unbelievable that so many designs were based around that period. But there was, what I also like is that it was a real time of experimentation. When we think of the 40s, there wasn't so much, I mean, yes, there was, but now they could really go ham with thinking about, we're talking about the whole nuclear age, the use of radium on their dials. They started getting a lot more excessive with the use of those kinds of finishes. I'm going to see if I can hold. So basically, I'm using the magic mouse and locking it with my fingers open. So hopefully you can see the screen better as I'm holding it. King of the Cludge, welcome. Great having you here. Clive, good having you here, sir. And Megan's saying the JLC Reverso. I thought the JLC Reverso came out in about the late 20s, early 30s, I'm not wrong. That's another thing. I mean, the 30s and the 50s were so important. Those two eras really made a difference. And so just referring to the 50 Fathoms lines, again, I was saying the whole idea of experimentation and how do we best explain? You know, they were using things, radium, in much greater amounts. They didn't have to be so, what's the word, restrained with their property. They could be a bit more excessive with the materials that they used. They could be a bit more forward thinking with innovations like the movement technologies and the rest. And I think the 50 Fathoms, I mean, that one in the middle, that's, would you call that an aqualung, I would say? It's just one of those timeless pieces. It definitely doesn't look like a watch that really belongs in the modern era today. It looks kind of dated. Let's see, Clive saying, are they really important, or is it that we just don't want to dwell in the 40s? No, Clive, I really think they are. The 40s was so important, but I did bring up, what I'll do is pull this up again. Since you've missed the beginning of the show, Clive, which I'm very disappointed in you for, I did say that what made the big difference in the 50s was that competition really governed the 50s. Competition governed the 50s instead of collaboration so much. So we started seeing companies really pushing the boundaries with their technologies for a change. We see brands like Omega and Rolex, instead of being together in a various way, we start seeing them trying to make the better sales, who can create the first dive watch, etc., etc. So I think that was the real transitional period. There's other things. I mean, you can just take a snapshot of this page. Resurgence of inspirations, applications and technologies changed at the time. And it's incredible. I mean, the transition really was big step forward. Clive saying, in my defense, you start the show at the same time every time. I'm totally not used to that. Oh yeah, so it's difficult synchronizing it with everyone in the world. And Shin asking, is that a 6.2 MAS? Good question. No, it's not. This is an original bathyscaphe. In the video that I put out this week, actually, talking about reissue dive watches, the 6.2 MAS basically copied this piece wholesale down to the T. This is the original bathyscaphe, which came out, I would say, late 50s, more like early 60s. Supposedly, the idea was that it was going to be a cheaper, more affordable, attainable diver next to the 50 Fathoms, which was more expensive. And so Seiko stole the design, called it the 6.2 MAS. And why I say the Willard, the 6105, was so great was it's really the time when Seiko stood out and made their own watch, their own dive watch for the first time. So these two especially, they look like pieces of the 50s. They don't look like watches that really work in today's climate. But then we move to something like, I mean, another great example, the Super Ocean. I mean, I love this thing. This is another watch that I try to bring some attention to. Again, I'm having to try and fight the magic mouse to get it centered. I hope that's okay. This piece, they called it the 1957 re-edition, something along the lines of that. And this is the original Breitling Super Ocean, which no one speaks about. It's very under the radar, subtle. This definitely does not look like a watch that belongs in today's world. It looks very old school, and that's down to the batons at the quarters and the strange hands used. I wish I could get a closer shot of it. Let me try and get the hand. Please work with me here. I tell you what, since I haven't used this format in so long, so Safari decides to change its method where I can't just pull in and zoom right into the image. So you're just going to have to bear with me as much as possible. Looks so like a bathroom sink. I think you're referring to this, Truth Fears. Yeah, it's so nuts. And Clive's saying, isn't the Speedy Pro really a 50s design? Well, not necessarily. We should pull up the 57 Speedmaster. Oh, geez. I'm really battling with this mouse. Can I right-click zoom? No, can't. I definitely don't want to open up separate articles, but it feels like I might have to. So let's get into monochrome and see if we can make it a bit smoother. It's a pain, but I hope that's a bit of an improvement, I think, kind of. It's an issue. Hamilton Ventura, for sure. So again, if you would like to reach out to me, tag me in the chat at IDGuy or hashtag, whatever works better, and I can read your comments a lot quicker. And we can just scroll looking through pieces. If you'd like to compare, if you'd like to ask me any kinds of questions relating to these pieces, design, styling, what you think opinions are like, Dishy describes for sure, Forbin. I mean, that's the best possible word you could use. We look at the dial and everything spaced. It is so peculiar just how it works. And one thing that I mentioned about the Super Ocean in the reissue video from last week is must be one of the most formal divers we've seen, because it just doesn't have any numerals on the bezel. It really was an experiment, like so many other watches of the time. Okay, I'm getting out of this and gonna try, and I want to look up the Hamilton Ventura. That's great. There are so many pieces, and we could be spending just hours talking about these pieces. Okay, where's a good example to have a look at? That's amazing. So we've actually featured quite a lot of these on the show because of our man Juan. I don't know if he's in the chat, but he collects all things Hamilton. It's his sideline piece, the sideline family to collect. And this is a good example to express the idea of 30s designs coming back and being brought back into the limelight. This looks like something straight out of Art Deco. Streamlined is the word that they threw around so much. And I mean, look at it. It's so peculiar. The asymmetry, the weird use of proportions and everything else. It's great. I mean, I must say, it's great having all of these pictures on tap so we can have a look at them. Such a pity that whenever I zoom in, so the thing zooms out again. I'm just going to have to try and manage it with my hands. So they called this the Elvis watch. I didn't know Elvis wore the Ventura. It's amazing. I knew he was a big Omega. I think he wore a DeVille at one stage. 50s fins on card. There is one. It's great. So yeah, talking about 50s inspirations. 30s inspiration. There's a pretty good example. Jetsons, for sure. I mean, that same time period, you know, that we hit the nuclear age, and all of a sudden it was Jetsons. It was nouveau future in a way. No one really knew what was going on. The whole radiation age or nuclear age really started opening up people's minds about what was possible and what was going to happen next. And of course, we had the Cold War at the backdrop and everything else. So there was competition there too. Orange Hand saying the 6542 Bakelite. Let's pull up one of those. I mean, this is a pretty good example. 6542 is a GMT, right? Let's pull it up. I still say I just love the original 50 fathoms and the Barracuda. It's Barracuda. It's gorgeous. I mean, this is one of the hero pieces. But funnily, I was told during that reissue video that I put out that this watch doesn't hack. The movement doesn't hack, which is just, it's hilarious. And if anyone would like to know a bit more information about the Hamilton that we just looked at, the Ventura, I think it's an electric piece. Let me just pull up that Rolex. What was it? A 6542. I feel like it's a GMT. Pepsi GMT, yeah, the first. It really is something cool. And very difficult to source nowadays. Let's see if there's a better shot. Of course, they give me low-res pixelated images. I try and get the best quality. You're just going to have to bear with me as I talk through the scrolling. But here's an example. Hope you can see that well enough. That's quite a hammered example, though. This is a great video. Antiques Roadshow. I think this was when the vet in 90. I think he bought this watch just as it was created, the original GMT Master, and he had it all his life. Great story, but this is a good example of a piece. Bakelite bezels, they fell apart, hard to replace. And again, I mean, these watches, I don't know if this is a radium dial or not. I don't know if that was a thing at that stage in time, or if they just swapped out and transitioned away. Anyway, how about a 1953 Breitling? Let's pull it up as well. Raymond, it was the first electric. Thank you for that, Raymond. It's good to know. So the Hamilton Ventura, see if I can get it up again. This was the first electric piece. This is an automatic example, but there's some amazing pieces in the family. And how it worked basically was it was used through a battery, basically powered, was the mainspring, essentially. And the movements worked as normal. Thomas saying Longines, the Legend Diver, is that what they call it? Okay, let's pull that up as well. You know, I mean, again, talking about reissue dive watches really has become its own genre. Whether we're talking about the Legend Diver, the Skin Diver, they really are just great. This black on black looks pretty superb. Let's get a close look at it. So compressor styles came in. I mean, we saw this begin in the 40s for sure. But when we reached the 50s, we started seeing these new experiments, and the dive watch really became ever so popular. People wanted to go into the ocean recreationally, professionally, scuba. I'm pretty sure scuba became a thing in the 50s. I don't know if that was a later stage, self-contained underwater breathing. Tudor 7926, the original Advisor. Oh, absolutely, Nick. That has to come up for sure. Let's get that. The Tudor Advisor is one of the most underrated watches out there. And I can just pull up a reissue that they've done. They've got a whole range, but I think the white dial, black dials, they're just such nice pieces. And I hope you're all seeing this okay. Again, this format, I'm not used to it. It's been a long time. It's been at least 2-3 months since we've actually done this. I don't think we've done this once the entire year, so it's a nice change of pace. But the Tudor Advisor was essentially a memovox in a way. This version has a date complication. So it was a precursor, not a precursor to the memovox. I'm sure they were introduced around the same time, but they come in all sorts of different color schemes and variants. This definitely doesn't scream, sought after Tudor nowadays, because everyone just wants the black base. But the Advisor, these being the reeditions and reissues, beautiful. Love the brown dial as well. Matthew from New Zealand, great having you here, sir. Yeah, so I mean, this is how the show used to run back in the day. It's quite amazing. I'm sort of reminiscing back. Always used to have topics on what watches you're wearing from home, and things like what's the best sports watch, what's the best dress watch. If you look back in the live show archives, you'll be able to see lots of stories about how the page began with these live streams. What are the chances that Breguet will release the same only watch Type 20? And that was that watch on the cover, the only watch. I love this luminor. We want to look at that just now as well. This is the thing, when we start talking about so many pieces, I'm going to pull up the only watch version. I don't know if that was the brown dial that I showed at the beginning of the, it is. So this is the actual cover. I didn't realize this was for only watch. So, I mean, this is as original as it gets when it comes to the Type 20. The tropicalized dial and the faux patina. I don't know if this is the best image. Is there something better to use? This is pretty good. So they really went to town with the tropicalization of the dial and all of that. Would Breguet bring this back? I think they would be fools not to at this point in time, because reissue watches they're becoming their own thing and people are really enjoying them. I think they do have a market. The hilarious thing is this is almost identical to a Hanhart chronograph. Let's try and pull one up, actually. We've had a look at the Advisor, love the brown dial. Let's pull up Hanhart chronograph. I don't know the references, but you will be quite surprised at, there we go, story of the Hanhart 417 chronograph. Steve McQueen's watch, would you believe? What does that look like? So there's your answer. I'm sorry to burst everyone's bubble about Type 20. Also, even the Longines Big Eye, Clive, they all pretty much got their inspiration from this family back in the day, which is just hilarious, actually, when you think that Germans, Joe, absolutely. So what happened, and this is, I'm actually working through this write-up currently about, I mean, there we go. There's your Type 20. I'm working through the write-up about French military pieces. And what happened was, during this whole reparation process, Hanhart was contracted to make military chronographs for French pilots and other pilots around the world too. And French, basically, Swiss companies started taking these ideas and using this format for their chronographs. So it's amazing. I mean, it's such a hilarious history. Everything from the bezel down to the pushes, the dial placement, everything is virtually identical, the onion crown. And this is something I actually want to talk about now. Let's pull this up. There's mention of a few other pieces, but I want to just pull up the Flieger in general. The Flieger watch has to be one of the most pivotal pieces from the time period of the 40s and just how it transitioned into the 50s. Here we have something that is basically your foundation for the field watch. And I'm working on a video about a certain IWC, but it's just unreal how IWC was on the fence and able to supply allies and Axis powers with watches, and basically took the format of the Flieger, shrunk it down, and turned it into a field watch. And so here we have the base plate of 50s and 60s field watches, as we know. We can bring up those at a later stage as well. I think field watches and utility sports watches are really my thing nowadays. And let's talk about the brand, Larco or Stover. With sterile dials, it's quite difficult to judge, but this is a Type B, by the way, if anyone's interested. So Raymond's saying a Larco, German Flieger. Yeah, French couldn't fight sheep. Yeah, so it's pretty cool studying about, and Evan's saying 50s and 60s, the golden age of mechanical watches. I really think it was quite a time, quite a moment where we got to see just how everything fell into place. And again, if I had to read off the list of watches that came from that time period, Submariner, GMT, Explorer, Day-Date, Seamaster, Speedmaster, Railmaster, Memovox, 50 Fathoms, Aqualung, Luminor, Navitimer, Type 20. There's so many more. There's Zodiac, Seawolf, there's the Yima, Superman, Super Ocean. It's just nuts. It's ridiculous. And Tippy says the Longines 1946 is relevant. Okay, we can have a look at that now. I'm going to move away from the Type 20. So I really think Breguet should bring this out. I think they would be fools not to, because it's just a shoe-in. If they bring this watch out the way it looks with that beautiful script, it's just so clean and legible. You can use this all day, any day, every day. It does everything you need to pilot chronograph. That's it. It's just stunning. And it just looks the business too, right? I think I should actually have the screen a little bit further. Okay. I'm going to have to learn. It's kind of like working a clutch in a car, this whole zooming in process. I'm going to have to like plan a method of getting everything arranged nicely. And I saw Longines 1946 from Tippy. Let's pull that up. I feel like we're referring to, oh, wow, fantastic. Yes, for sure. And this is a factory. This is a brand new model, if I'm not wrong. They've just released this. That's one thing that we should point out, that Longines is doing some amazing stuff with their reissue watches. They're really pulling it out of the bag with their what's the reference? Heritage pieces. I did one on the Heritage Classic, which is also a 40s inspired piece. JLC Master Compressor. I think that was also, yes, Clayton, that was definitely a watch as well. We can talk about that soon. Just, you need to repeat yourselves a few times, I think, because I'm going to be running through a lot of references, and if I miss out, you don't worry. You can always repeat again. Tagging me in the chat is a good way to get my attention, but then everyone tags me and it becomes a mess. So Richard Mill, also inspired by Candy of the Age. You're kidding, Shashank. That is so funny. Are we talking about the ladies' watches that were released lately? So anyway, this piece, I can imagine, also stemmed from the 40s. You can correct me there. 46, I think you said. And does this look like a watch that really transitioned into the modern era? It looks like a piece of the time. It's hilarious how we can look at pieces and say it looks like something of its time, like the Luminor. This definitely doesn't, I don't believe this to be a modern looking piece. This looks like something of the 50s, similar to the Radiomir. Panhard chronograph, I mean, that's a watch of the 50s. This GMT, I mean, what's amazing is how Rolex managed to transition across. I'd like to talk about that now, actually. Let's try and break down why, if we're going to stick to Rolex watches, let's just say the Submariner, because it's easy enough to put. Actually, no, let's look at the GMT Pepsi. It's also pretty basic to talk through. And the reason as to why this watch has managed to survive next to, we're going to transition away. Let's just pull away from the Panerai and just pull up a Seamaster 57. Why not? And we can just compare and contrast these two watches and just get a good understanding as to why these two just do not fit in the same area. I will admit that. I mean, even someone who loves and adores this watch, I'll admit that it looks like a watch of its time. It does not. Glycine Airman, it's another one. Thank you, Raymond. There's so many watches. It's just nonstop. Glycerin, that's funny. Truth is. So I can admit this watch does not look like a modern piece at all. It looks really old. Barring the faux patina on the dial, it looks very old school. When you look at the batons, the numerals, everything, the sword hand, the arrow hands, the bezel size, the way the case and bracelet work together. When you actually have the watch in hand, you see just the way that the bezel and the dial integrates into the case. It's so like stacked on top of each other, very old school. When we refer to something like the Pepsi, what's made this watch so much more timeless, just the Rolex name in general, is that they do not focus on any specific motif. They keep it very stock standard, basic, utilitarian. And that's their biggest strength, is that the watches end up being less and less polarizing. So, Karen, did you know that dive watches aren't the only watches that exist? Emily, no, I didn't know that. I just did this for a comparison, looking at these two. So the real difference here, apart from the Mercedes hand, which does look pretty kind of old school, the round plots, batons, triangles, I mean, that's Bauhaus in the purest sense of the word. No numerals on the dial, which also makes it look a lot more streamlined and simple. But then with this piece, with just the clutter of numerals, the batons themselves also, I mean, they do correspond nicely with the hands, but the whole aesthetic looks pretty old-fashioned, you know what I mean? So there's all sorts of little cues that we can take. Again, looking at this, the Longines chronograph, 1946, I think they called the Heritage chronograph. We have Breguet-esque numerals. We have leaf-styled hands. Comparing this to a more modern sports watch, like, I don't know, let's pull up just a Speedmaster Professional as a example. And we can see that the modern watch, this piece has managed to really transcend time very well, because again, it uses a dial that is extremely, as I zoom in, so it pulls further away. I mean, that's just like any relationship, right? It's a watch that doesn't have anything that's very conflicting. It looks like an instrument, you know? So yeah, it's just, that's the way we develop as time goes by. What was another reference? There was mention of a Zodiac. What was else? There was a Glycine Emin. Let's have another look. Now, the Glycine Emin is another piece that looks like a watch of the 50s. I mean, you have a look at that aesthetic and you go, well, it definitely, I wouldn't say it's transitioned, especially looking at this format, it hasn't transitioned so smoothly out of this time into the modern era. But we start seeing this experimentation, GMT complication. Zodiac Seawolf, that's another watch we can bring up now. Yeah, I mean, that's the way it goes. Let me try and catch up with all of you here. And Emily dropping truth ordinance on us for sure. No bezel, still nice. Yeah, Emily, I just pulled it up as I'm going. This is definitely spitballing for the most part. I am causes anxiety, Joe. Yeah, I mean, that's it. It's in the Vietnam video that I did, I spoke about how it's so cluttered. And this was so favored during the Vietnam era because they were affordable, they were functional, they were great working pieces for what pilots needed them to be, but it's just so busy. And Megan's saying not many of us go diving, but a vast majority wear divers, desk divers. Yeah, I mean, it's the real thinking behind that. Great point, Megan. The real point behind that is that people love the idea of owning a watch that they know they can just beat the snot out of and not have to worry about it. And Rolex has really gotten that name. So many others as well. I mean, Zinn and other pieces. Let's pull up a Zinn Navi timer and nip it in the bud once and for all. Because I said something pretty foolish when I did the Zinn video a couple of days back. Here's a Breitling variant. So Zinn actually owns back in the day, they owned the right to the Navi timer aesthetic. And this is another watch. Came out in the 50s, transitioned across. This is a good picture. So the Zinn Navi timer, ladies and gentlemen, is another piece of that time that really established a German watch, once again, influencing Swiss design. So it goes, the Germans. So dive watches, the whole aesthetic, the whole idea is that people like the fact that their watch can go 300 meters and they're robust and resilient, waterproof. It's that assurance. I think that's the main reason why people get into them. They're also just extremely functional from a utilitarian sense. I mean, what's another good example of a diver from the time? Let's pull up Zodiac Seawolf. Is that a good? It's a bit old-fashioned, but we can talk about the Seawolf as a watch just to refer to. Where's a good piece to look at? I can just pull up one of these. I think this was a topper edition. The whole idea that you have not only a watch that just functions day to day. This is probably better. This is from a Dinky. But the fact that you also have a bezel, and the chronograph was the real changer in that period. You know, the idea of a bezel that can be used to be adjusted for countdown timing is so practical every day. And the fact that it's not a part of a complication like a chronograph that is more temperamental, that can break. A bezel is just simple, snap on, move it around, return it to the center, you're done, dusted. It's probably one of the best innovations that I think we saw begin in the 40s as well. So Clive's saying, I think you got it backwards. They licensed the design from Breitling. Is that so, Clive? See, I get so confused. You can imagine me not only working on write-ups, but trying to keep a schedule that I sometimes miss out on a few points. So Clive's saying that they licensed the design from Breitling. But there was talk that this design came first, before the Navi timer. I don't know. But VC Vintage Chronograph, it's another one we can bring up for sure. And again, tag me in the chat if you'd like to ask me a question about a certain thing, if you'd like me to ask, just relating to comparisons between watch A, watch B, we can get that rolling. What's another piece? We're talking about divers for a second. Let's look at field watch. Let's look at let's just look up the IWC Mark 11, because that really was where it transitioned from the era of, we say, the Dirty Dozen to something a bit more modern. This watch really is an amazing case study. I don't know if you can, I hope you can see this well enough. This piece in particular is such a nice case study. You can write a thesis on the Mark 11. Just, I should also say, it wasn't only IWC, it was also a JLC at the same time. They both were contracted. Even Smiths had Mark 11s. The whole idea was that the Mark 11 case was what came into being in and around the 50s, the late 40s, early 50s it began, and lasted until about 1963 before it was decommissioned. Giza, welcome to the show. And Tippy saying, try Patek 96. Oof, I'll pull it up now. Let's get one going, actually. We need to talk about some dress watches of the time. You can drop some names of 50s era dress watches that have managed to transfer across. Was the Patek 96 a watch from the 50s or was it from the 30s? I've got the strange feeling that it came from the 30s, but you need to confirm, please. There were lots of references from this time. I mean, this looks like something pretty of that time period. Where's a better image? Of course, they're all giving me 5196s. Oh, it's gorgeous. 1935 to 40. See, it's another thing. I mean, if we had to refer to 30s designs, then that's a whole new subject in itself, because 30s were definitely very important. Rob Ward's saying the RAF 5777 from 52, I believe, also. So all of these companies, the whole idea behind the Mark 11, it wasn't so much about the company, but the real styling, the case design, the dial design, all of that made the difference. The Constellation, yes, let's get the Constellation up for sure. Constellation, another video I did recently, and amazing how we saw just how everything changed from the 50s, 60s, 70s. I need to pull up 50s. There are some beautiful gold pieces. I just cannot get enough of these. This is from Fratello. Now we can see that this is another example of two pieces that look like they belong in the 50s because of how their batons are placed. The deco, Rococo rounded lugs in a way. Wristwatch Experience, great having you here. Welcome. And Zane, great to have you here, sir. Patek 5570 is a classic. I think we will dedicate a few minutes later on to Pateks only. That'll be a great time. But the Mark 11, we have spoken about Fliegers for a second. I think this watch as a case study is so important nowadays because we get to see just how the Flieger was transplanted into a field watch, a scaled down piece that could be worn by RAF pilots essentially as a navigational instrument piece. And pretty funny, these turned out to be fail-safes because of how technology had evolved after the 50s. So these were really there. If all the electronic instruments failed, pilots could use these to help with astral navigation. And yeah, it's just a stunning watch. It's very unique. It's kind of quirky in a way. I wouldn't say, would we say this watch has really transitioned across to the modern era? I don't think so. I think watches that came after this were a bit more streamlined. This seems a bit too technical for what it is. And in saying that, experimental timeline. And there was mention about pipe hands. Oh, for sure. Pipe hands, that was the thing. That was the jam. And the Constellation at this time was their top of the line model. They really had to show off what they had. So Megan saying, sorry, I missed your point about the Mark 6. Did I say the Mark 5, Mark 6? IWC threw me off as my brain and not functioned properly the last 2 weeks. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that for sure, Megan. It's been a crazy few weeks for you guys, especially. I really hope that James as well. It'd be so nice to hear from him soon. Anyway, going to catch a rich buddy. Great having you here as well. And Universal Genève Pole Router. Oh, let's do that as well. You see, what I mean is that watches of the time, was the Pole Router a 60s model though? I'm thinking, I don't know. You're going to have to help me and correct me on that. I feel like this is a watch of the 60s, not the 70s, that you might need to correct me there. It also, it was a Genta design as well. The Zodiac Olympios, 1956. My Pole Router is 1959. Oh, fantastic. Okay, that's great. So we do hit that timeline. And I mean, this is Mad Men all the way through. So we talk about navigational instruments. These two watches, this one and the Mark 11, were essentially designed for the same sort of purpose of being these objects that traveled from A to B, being flown from various poles around the world. And Typo 11, oh, for sure. So what did I mention about the Mark 11? So basically what I've learned and read up about this watch in particular, the styling. Let's see if I can pull up another. Maybe there's some JLCs or something we can look at. Here we go. JLC and an IWC. I hope, come on screen, cooperate with me. It's not going to do it. I'm just going to have to feel it out. So the real name Mark 11 came from the case styling and the dial, and many companies contributed. Even Smiths at the time in the 50s had their own Mark 11 style case that they incorporated their aesthetic in. Miss tritium tubes for sure. Since started making the 903, O and W started assembling the parts they bought and sold Navitimers under the Aviation brand. I mean, it's just nuts. There's just so much history behind these watches and what they really did, how they transitioned across. Rooted, great having you here. Okay, let's pull up some more obscure pieces. There was mention of a few watches a second ago. Let's see, IWC. I've never even heard of that name. Let's pull it up and have a look. IWC car or care. Wow, another 50s piece. Has this watch transitioned into the modern era so well? Again, it's another example of a watch that looks like something that belongs in the time. So I think we refer back to the whole design element. I think what really made the difference between the watches that have transitioned well and not so well is streamlined manufacturing, the use of simplified forms. I mean, what makes this polarizing is that it's square, and square we kind of link to 30s motifs, 30s and 40s, possibly 20s. Thank you for this, Christopher. Nice suggestion. Tudor with their 58, Submariner, Snowflake. Yeah, I mean, that's another model we can pull up for sure. And it's a watch that I think Dear Artifact mentioned very well, that the whole idea of Tudor addressing what people wanted was really what made this watch so popular. It's not a difficult thing. Honestly, I don't think watch brands do enough market research. I mean, when I say that, I mean, they don't get audience feedback. They don't really, I mean, if you want to get the best feedback, you listen to the enthusiasts. IWC Portuguese, that was also a model. Fantastic, Shaitan. Let's get that as well. Love the pole router. So you'd imagine that more companies would be a bit more open when it comes to asking the audience what they want to see. Do we look at the chronograph, or do we look at, I mean, is this another piece of that time? I feel like this was another piece of that time period. It's another piece that I haven't studied enough. I've looked at often enough, but I haven't referred back to. It's a gorgeous watch. So I feel like we're getting to an age now, which is fantastic, actually, that we're transitioning into this whole social media era where we can gain a lot more insight into what people want to see, what they want to own. And companies don't care about enthusiasts. I mean, that's perfectly true, Britt Lane. But I mean, at the same time, the enthusiasts are the ones that have the most, dare I say, knowledge about the stuff. And therefore, they know what they want, they know what they don't want. And it can help so much with that kind of market research when it comes to developing new pieces. What exactly, the only sad thing is that we might get to a case, we kind of are sitting in a case where they're not bringing out anything new per se. Most of what we're seeing, and this is the flip side of 50s watch design, is that they pretty much are rehashing these elements nowadays. It's the same as it always has been. Again, I'm sorry about these images. I wish I could get them bigger for all of you, but the screen is not cooperating with me here. But I think this is a pretty good example of a family that has managed to dig deep into 50s motifs and elements, try and bring out something a bit different, address the pieces differently, and in the end, bring out a 6538 essentially with a snowflake hand. So yeah, the Ball Trainmaster. This is Tarek's watch. The Galet chronograph. Again, if you can tag me in the chat, it'll be a little bit easier if I can catch you, but the Harboring Felix, inspired by the Portuguese. You see, this is the thing. I mean, this is exactly, I now remember what these shows were like, because we would end up just going for it for ages, you know. What is it? The Harboring Felix. Let's have a look. So inspired by the Portuguese. Oh, stunning. What a beautiful piece. Mono pusher as well. That is gorgeous. I need to look at Harboring as a brand, because I've seen a few on Wrist Shot Week that have been shared with all of us. And I mean, that is just beautiful. I mean, that's really Bauhaus in the way it's approached. The Master Control, Clayton, let's get that up as well. Master Control, the Memovox. I think you also mentioned the compressor. Look at that dial. Single pusher at the top. simple batons, pencil-styled hands. I wouldn't say it's a watch that's really managed to transition out of the time period. It looks like something that is pretty dated when you look at the way the dial is arranged. It's a little bit too, how can we say? I could say Bauhaus, German, a bit more of a dress watch than something a bit more contemporary, if you know what I mean. So yeah, let's try and, there's so many. Wittenauer watches is another one from Raymond. JLC Master Control, let's pull it up. And I see a few more mentions. It's so funny. Now I actually remember what it was like running these shows back in the day. It's hilarious. Let's see, 1950. Did they give you anything from that time period? So the compressor line, I'm pretty sure, I mean, I always think of Memovox as a watch that came out in that period. The Master Compressor line, here's an example. Here's another piece. They also had the Deep Sea tributes. The tribute to Deep Sea was another variant that came out around that time too, if I'm not wrong. It's just nuts. Code 1159, I've got to read that question. But the Speedmaster Professional, I mean, this watch transitioned out of the 57 era, arrived into this modern period where it changed quite completely. Rodania geometer. So Mason's saying a lot of companies play it safe. Occasionally some companies push boundaries, but then you end up with things like the Code 1159. Let's pull up that watch just for giggles and have a look at it. Shame. Yeah, it's what I find quite sad is when an audience unanimously disapproves or doesn't really like it. It's, you know, you can see where they're going with it. They were trying to make something, and this is actually a very good comparison. Look at the handset and the batons and compare it to the harboring. Notice how we're trying to dig deep to those cues of that time period, of that 50s transitional 60s era. But then they used these numerals. I think the numerals were one of the elements that really put the watch out of place. And it makes it sort of retro futuristic. You kind of think 80s in a way when you see those open 9s and 6s. But then again, the numerals used on the watch, they look very similar to what we see on Rolex pieces. So that's something else. And yeah, it's just an ever-going discussion. We talk about the Lunga, Odysseus, Vulcan Cricket. That needs to come up. Thank you for that suggestion from Matt. I'm never going to botch your name. I'm sorry, buddy. Vulcan Cricket is another model that definitely stemmed at the time. And I have spoken, when did I speak about this? This was also during Wrist Shot Week a while back. Where's a good image to use to share? I mean, here's an example. Calendar alarm. Let's get a nice high-res image to have a look at properly. Oof. It's a beautiful looking watch. It really is a beautiful looking watch. And the only real element that dates this, it does look like quite a modern piece. The element that really dates this piece, I would say the handset, the batons, maybe the elongated numerals also makes it look pretty old-fashioned. The actual Vulcan name, I mean, that looks like something straight out of the 50s, you know? But it is an interesting piece. I really like it. I like what it stands for and what it managed to do. There was mention about the case styling of the Code 11. I must say the case styling is something unique. Forbin asking, would Spock wear a Vulcan? I think it's too cliche, actually. It'd be too cliche for him to wear one. The one element that makes this watch, there's a few details that really makes this watch unique. Let's try and get a better image up. Okay, that might work. So even through this, they decided to stick to the Royal Oak aesthetic, and they kept the 8 sides, the 8 corners of the inside of the ring of the case. You see that sharp detent there. I also like the channeled out lugs. Very nice, streamlined. But it's the dial, man. The dial is what really makes people stumble. I think of all the references, the chronograph's pretty good, but I think the calendar itself is one of the best. I don't know if I can find one for all of you. The chronograph isn't bad, but yeah, it's we were talking about how companies, don't do enough market research and asking enthusiasts about the watches that they would like to see. It's great that they decided to go this route and try their best to bring out something, but I actually lost my train of thought as I was talking. I just got so confused by the dial, the large plots and everything else. It's a strange piece. I mean, try and find a perpetual calendar for all of us. I think when I did do a video about this watch a while back, I think the perpetual calendar is actually stunning. Of all the watches in the line, that looks terrific. And it's down to it not having numerals on the sides and everything else. The Eberhard chronograph. Hoya, a moon phase Hoya. That's also good. Emily, let's get one of those as well. God, see, this is the thing. I'm going to be stuck getting all of these pieces going as we roll. So Hoya from the 1950s. Let's see what they were doing. What are they busy with? Oof, wow. Pre-Carrera chronographs. I mean, here we go. Now, what's interesting is that this watch, look at it. I mean, check the monopusher. This looks just like a Hanhart as well. It even has cathedral hands and everything else. So what dates this watch really to the 50s period? Thank you for the suggestion, by the way, by Emily. What dates this watch to this period? The syringe-styled hands. I think the numerals as well around the dial. It just reminds you of a chronograph that looks like it has a telemeter scale on it, you know? That was what I was going to mention, wristwatch experience. It just reminded me, talking about the code 1159, about refusal. It just blows me away to think that the company invested so much money into tooling, into manufacturing, into the gold, into the movement, a whole new movement, new crystals, everything, on a whim, basically. You know, a serious risk that they were going to bring something out. And now that these pieces are out in the open, yeah, people are a little bit confused. Anyway, great suggestion about the Hoya pieces. Let's see if I can find a moon phase, as mentioned. I mean, these really do, again, refer back to, there's a Leonidas, which is just another brand of the time, pre-Hoya Carrera. It looks just the same as the Type 20s that we saw already. Already covered the Super Seawolf. We covered the Seawolf, not the Super Seawolf, Chris. I think there's a difference there. Universal Tri-Compacts, Raymond, that's a good one as well. So it's quite hilarious. I mean, the idea was to stick to how did 1950s designs become so iconic, and now we've gone into just talking about 50s designs in general. It's pretty hilarious, and we can see very clearly these are beautiful pieces. Wow. This is a nice example, Omega Forums. So we get to see just how these watches some have managed to stay stuck in the 50s while others have managed to transition out of them. And really the answer is, this is quite a good example of a watch that looks to be teetering in the 60s in a way, because it's starting to step away from the conventional, you know, dial arrangement and placement of everything there. What a beautiful watch. Moon phase. I mean, this is a full deal. This is an annual calendar. Huh? It's got a day, date, month, moon phase, full chronograph. Beautiful. Let's have a look at that movement. So what was Universal using as a movement back in the day? I don't know the caliber. If someone could tell me if there's any kind of reference, that'd be good to know. Looks stunning though. It reminds me of a Patek Philippe actually. Were they using similar? Was it Lemania based? I don't know. How about a Cartier Crash? That's awesome. Was that watch around in the 50s? I do not know. Let's keep checking. So Cartier Crash. I mean, we're talking about Cartier. Those watches definitely do sit in their own time period of the 30s, I would say. But the Crash, I think the story that stemmed from it was that it's this whole idea of a guy returning the watch after it got crushed after a car collision or something. But some others think it was a Dali inspired piece as well. When we talk about what's the painting, the continuation of time, the mystery of time, or something along the lines of that. I mean, it's just so peculiar. Here's a 1991 version. So what would we call this piece? I mean, the original tanks were brought out in like just after the First World War in the 20s, transitioning to the 30s. You know, this piece makes me dizzy, as Juan says. Yeah, it does. I mean, I think it's kind of great, but also some people really aspire to own one of these as well. I enjoy the fact that it looks like you're literally tripping on some kind of banned substance every time you look at it. You know, it just doesn't feel real. It's so, what's the art period I'm thinking of? Again, I'm on the fly talking about this stuff. What is it? It's on the tip of my tongue. What was the art period? The persistence of memory. Yes, that's it. Thank you for that. Salvador Ali owned owed money for that. What was the time period of this? Surrealist. Come on, wake up, man. The Surrealist period. This does look like a watch that has definitely transitioned out of it. That's it. Thank you, Eric. Just hit me in my head. Surrealist time period. This looks like it, you know? Anyway, let me transition back. Let's think about more watches that have managed to survive the 50s and transition across to what we now know today. Let's get back on topic. A watch on acid, Megan. I mean, that's the case. So it's just pure. That is it. So twice crashed. Tip of the tongue period. So let's think of some more models that managed to transition across. I mean, I continually think of dive watches and those sports pieces because that's just me. I love utility watches. I guess we could look at field watches as well as an example. What is another? I think I've basically mentioned. How about a day date for a change? Day date managed to arrive in this time. Let's see. I'll pull up 1950s and we get to enjoy some vintage models of the time. This is a date just. Date just was a little bit earlier. The day dates, I mean, the one thing that really makes it a classic day date were these gorgeous alpha-styled hands on the dial, really unique. I need to do a video on the day date line. I think there's so much to learn when we talk about the history and development. When did the Cellini arrive? Very good question. And I'm going to botch your name, but Srijan, thank you for asking that question. Did you go over any Rolex 1950s? I'm trying to, Rich. I'm trying to jump in. Do you have any suggestions? I mean, we have GMT, Submariners, we have day date. Let's have a look at Rolex. Maybe the Cellini was at a later stage. I feel like it might have been in the 60s, but let's reaffirm. Maybe there's some more information here. No, these look a bit too modern. These look more like 60s and 70s era pieces. But then we look at what Rolex was doing, and this is probably in and around the same time. This is from a Sotheby's auction. And it's just incredible what 50s Rolex was actually like. That's actually what I'm going to do. Let's just pull up Rolex 1950, and we can see what kind of things they made. I mean, the chronographs, John Goldberger's chronograph. By the way, speaking of John Goldberger, if you don't follow me on Instagram, I've been spamming this little gem, little PRS29, and I tagged John Goldberger in the post saying, what did I say? Something like channeling my inner Goldberger. He thought it was quite entertaining. So great piece. Anyway, talking about 50s pieces, Goldberger loves these eras of watches and the chronographs that came of that time. I think one of the most famous was in and around this period as well. Aren't those triangle-shaped Hamilton watches developed and released in the 50s? We're talking about the Venturas. Yes, Megan, they were the first electronic watches, as someone mentioned during the show. The Bulliver A17A, another US military, fantastic. Thomas, let's pull it up. I mean, even though I've barely scratched the surface of, let's get the reference, A17A. I'm pretty sure this is a watch that I mentioned in the Vietnam era. Yeah. I mean, even though I've just scratched the surface with American watches, field watches, completely different area and field. Come on, give me something high res. HQ Milton as an example. So this watch, again, looks like a watch of that time. It looks like, just as we transition away from the Dirty Dozen, so we get to see a piece that resembles something similar. But what really made the American field watch stand out was the 24-hour time around the dial. Looks stunning. Oof. Fowsley saying the Padalone 1950s. I feel like that is one of the rarest Rolex of the time. Let's pull that up as well. Padalone, or Padalone, I'm going to botch it, 1950. Yeah, I mean, this was really, it was such a golden era for the family. I mean, look at that. I don't understand. This is what I find quite sad about modern Rolex, actually. This definitely looks like a watch of the 50s. It kind of reminds me of JLC, just the standard master controls, which I should also bring up, the master control dates and all of those with the batons around the dial. But I find it quite sad that Rolex is now known as a brand solely focused on sports watches. I mean, that's really where they got their footing, you know, in the, should we say, the mass media, mass marketing, with their invention of the oyster case and everything else. But I mean, these watches are just terrific. They are so gorgeous. And I mean, just look at it. They call them unicorns. This is a reference A171 triple calendar. It's all, I would imagine, this looks like a 14 karat gold because it looks kind of rose. I don't know. And it's probably aged over time. But it's just incredible how the family has transitioned away from these pieces. I really think Rolex should pull out one of these watches again. Just drop it and see what the audience reaction is like. Maybe put it into their Cellini line in a way, but really spice it up and create something great. So Rich Brady is saying Rolex prove that they can make everything better than anyone else. And once they do that, they stop making them. I mean, that's what's a good example. I think of Audi in a way, actually. I can talk about that now in a second. Speaking of which, next week, Thursday, dropping a video on, let's get up another reference. This is the nice thing about just pulling up references, as it's pretty easy. 6062. There are some, thank you for all of these, fantastic. All of you who are actually contributing and giving me some references to look at. We can all get to enjoy these. I mean, look at that black dial over there. Here's some more examples. The stars. I mean, this really does feel like 50s to the core, you know, stars around the dial. So next week, Thursday, I'm dropping a IDGuy. Thank you, Shashank. I'm dropping a video all about watches and cars. It's finished. It's ready to go. And so talking about Rolex being a brand that wants to prove themselves, and then once they've done it, they stop making. I think of Audi, Group B Rally, when they brought out the Quattro. And then again, Le Mans, when they brought out these amazing hybrid cars, and then they decided to leave, you know, to focus on Formula E and all of that stuff. Forbin mentioning something about syringe hands. Let's get back to the Bolivar and talk about it a bit more. As I zoom in, so it zooms out. It's like the worst relationship, you know. It's like any kind of relationship. Zoom in, and so it pulls away. So Forbin says, are syringe hands an entry-level drug? Heroin and watches are both addictive. Yeah, true. I mean, so talking about this piece, referring back to like the Dirty Dozen inspiration field watches of the time, I'm quite useless with 1940s American field watches. You might need to give me a bit more help. But the whole idea of just this watch definitely looks like it belongs in the 50s timeline, with the syringe hands, with the numerals around the dial, just the stylization of everything. It's not as crisp and clean. I think the numeral set also looks a bit dated, but the 24-hour time, I think, was a very modern innovation. Really started pushing the field. Oh, it's a good example. Really started pushing the field watch in a different direction, and just gorgeous. I mean, one thing I love about this watch, being a mechanical hand-wound piece, is that you can wind it, and the crown is there, and it's huge. You don't have to worry about, you know, getting your fingers all cramped up, winding it every day. It's there to be used, you know. Bolivar looks tiny. I mean, it is BDEV. I think it's like 34 millimeters, maybe even 33 millimeters. Don't know. Group B. Yeah, we're talking about cars. We'll be here all night. My Benris from 66 looks like that Bolivar. So that's another thing. Benris, we transitioned to Vietnam era. We started seeing, I mean, I'm pretty sure these cases were just surplus. You know, they just used them because they worked. It's funny. I don't know what the deal is, but the MOD, British MOD, were much more pedantic when it came to, where's some other good examples of pictures to use? This is one thing I don't like about doing this kind of presentation, is that it gets a bit hairy. One thing about the British MOD was that they were very much trying to like change every format every time they could, where Americans seemed a lot more complacent with the way they styled their pieces, you know, field watches. Does that mean Tesla is Grand Seiko? Mark P, you're quite close, I would say. It's definitely one of. Can we check out King Seiko? So we've basically been talking about this for 80 minutes at this point, and now we can actually start transitioning to other things, if you like. I think we've definitely, for anyone who's catching up, who just started watching the show, we've had a long talk about 50s inspirations and all of those pieces, how we transitioned around. But now we can actually, I think, be a bit more creative in the next hour, if you'd like. So ask me more questions about various pieces for sure. Let me catch up with you in the chats. I'm trying to be as attentive as possible, but I am missing out on you. I just adore these two. Incredible what these watches did. So Megan's saying the 1952 Breitling Navitimer was released, and I think most long-term collectors has had one of these on the wrist at some point, for sure. I mean, they really are, and it's. I think the Navitime has managed to hit this area where it's collectible for a lot of reasons, not only for its application, but also it really was a fashion back in the day to enjoy pilot-esque watches. I mean, the Navitimer, I think in the 90s, if I'm not wrong, the 90s was a period where everyone just wanted to own them, similar to Panerai at the same time, you know. So Triforce Rich saying, one point about the 36-day date that the larger models lose is that the watch wears like a jewelry bracelet. And I love talking about that. That's something that I try to bring up as much as possible, is that the smaller the size of the watch head, the more presence the bracelet has. I mean, it's a brilliant point. It means then that when the watch is on the wrist, it feels much more like a fashion statement. It feels more like something formal in a way, you know? I mean, here's an example. I would imagine this, I don't know if this is a male or female's wrist, but you get the idea. 36 millimeter watches, love them or hate them. Lots of people just don't like them at all. But the idea that it blends so nicely with the bracelet, and then there's this shared presence between the two, just makes it feel so much more impactful and intact, integrated. Look at that dial. There's all of these pieces. It's called the bow die. I think this belonged to a prime minister or a president of a country. You might need to help me there. Okay, going to catch up with all of you here. I think Rich Buddy mentioned something. Let me see if I can catch him in the chat. Rolex knows that there is no market for horology where a piece goes down 75% once it leaves the shop. They definitely, I must say, of all the brands, Rolex does have a finger on the pulse, and they dictate what the market wants in most. The King of Vietnam, thank you, Tippy. They dictate a lot of what people want to see. It's amazing. It's amazing how marketing has managed to push watches around. And you know, when you buy a certain brand, you feel like you're getting what they promise and everything else. A lot of it is marketing based, but then saying that, a lot of it's not. I don't know. The watch world is an amazing place. Why can't they make a Rolex Cellini look like that? I know, right? I think they would have a killing. But then again, the dress watch period, the dress watch phase has changed. We don't necessarily see them all at all nowadays. They're not marketed as much. There's not so much money, really focused in on them when it comes to marketing, because they just aren't, sadly, they just aren't as desirable as sports pieces. The question I would like to ask all of you is, do we think that that's going to change? Do we think that we'll start seeing a resurgence? Because we can look at the whole social media influence both ways. In a way, I've literally got Rolex and Boulevard on all the slides. Let's get another piece up. Nate, welcome to the show. And Forbin saying, fitted lugs add a formality that not always is preferable, especially in sports watches. So yeah, let's pull up something. What's another good example? Another watch of the 50s. Let's pull up a Breitling the 806. Breitling, is that it? I don't know. Let's have a look. It's one reference that I can just remember. Oof. This is such a cool watch. It really does look so great. It's so busy and just ridiculous, but oh my goodness, it's stunning. Ooh, got that nicely framed. I hope you can see that okay. So here's the question that we can ask. The whole idea of social media being this influencer and people out there talking about their opinions about pieces, being able to reach people a lot more intimately nowadays. You have to ask, will we see a change? Will there come a point? I mean, the whole idea of sports watch fatigue, very much like how dress watches phased out. Do you think we will see a change back to dress watches, or maybe a blend of both? I would like to see a world where we can enjoy the brilliance of dress watches while at the same time you get that ruggedness as well, and Russell, welcome to the show. A lot of you submitted watches for Wrist Shot Week, as we would probably expect, but this is how the presentation format used to be about a year ago, and it's the first time I've done this in like 4 months. And the beginning of the show, if you go back an hour, you'll see how the show began, where I spoke about just what 50s watches were about and the time period and the climate. And yeah, it's a bit of a different approach. So Emily saying, well said. What did I say? Just talking about, will we see a transition back? I think it's very divisive. I don't know if that's the case. what I find really sucks is just how hype watches are getting so excessive. I mean, I enjoy watching producer Michael videos at times, but they always end up showing us the same stuff. And where we seem to be going now with watches, let's keep that on the screen. Beautiful watch. Let's transition to, we were talking about this brand a second ago. I like to call it the prototype watch, the prototype family. But these are now becoming the hot commodities. Come on, give me a full res picture. What is the deal with this? Come on. So these are now the hot commodities that everyone wants. Richard Mille, not everyone, but I mean, this is what's advertised. This is what's marketed, you know? And I find it quite sad. Actually, I look at it both ways. Let me try and address this both ways. First off, I see it as the concept watch. I see it as something that really does look like something that jumps off the page, you know, as a piece that looks futuristic, very modern in the way it's done. It definitely doesn't look like a 50s watch in the slightest, but in saying that, it uses the tonneau shape, which was very much a watch of that time. And Rich Brady says he likes this combination. I really enjoy the rose with the black as well. I think it's such a nice pairing, but overall, I just find it quite sad that we're moving into, in a way, it's a good thing that we're moving into a new area, a new direction in a sense. But again, we are also transitioning away from stuff like this. I mean, this is just incredible. This is its own genre. I think reissue watches have their own place, but these are now taking center stage as these desirable pieces, and it's getting a bit nuts. And then, as I mentioned, the idea of reverting back to dress-inspired watches. I feel like this is a good example of a watch that blends sports and dress pretty well in its own way. You know, it's fully usable. You're paying like 6 figures for this thing, but it has a Velcro strap on it, an elastic Velcro strap. It's quite difficult to read the time. Anyway, so I find it quite sad that that's the way the industry seems to be going in many areas. Also talk about AP and the Royal Oaks and the Offshores and Pateks with the Nautiluses and the Aquanauts. We're starting to see the whole line between sports and dress getting kind of blurred. And then you get those who are real enthusiasts jumping back to watches like the reissues and trying to source vintage watches of the time. And there's just so much in this area. We talk about marketing and watches of the time, and there's so much in this area to discuss, you know? So Rich Ray says chunky. Yeah, I get the Mr. T chain to go with the meal. Yeah, I mean, there's some great combos for sure. It would look pretty entertaining, pretty funny. Thoughts on the Rainbow Super Ocean, as George says. Now, I really didn't look into that at all, that collaboration. Let's pull it up. So, what do I think? It's a watch that's going towards charity, I would imagine. I really don't know the story. I guess it's to help. It's a relief program. It's a relief system, and that's where it all stemmed from. But I don't get it. I can imagine what they've done is, since this was a newly released watch at the time, I think the 57 reissues have just come out, and they thought it would be a nice idea to create some kind of commemorative piece. In a way, I think, you see, what I don't get is that this is definitely a male's watch. With a rainbow effect, it looks more like a female's watch. But then in saying that, when we think about its meaning, what it actually represents, inclusive super ocean, Shashank, I mean, that's probably the best way you could say it for sure. I think it's a watch that definitely does commemorate something, or not exactly a good time, but I mean, it does mark a time period. I don't know if any other watches are doing the same thing. What's that Tutti Frutti? I mean, immediately it brings to mind things like the Daytona Rainbow. We spoke about the Richard Milles, but another example. Thank you, Mark P, for joining. First super chat of the show. It's great. Check out Jimmy Split. Yeah, thank you. So let me just read it out. James says, have to go. Brilliant show. Get well soon, James. James Arthur, who is founder of Timeless Capital. He's been battling over the last few weeks. Now, we all really hope he's pulling through. He is pulling through. I just know that he's going to be hospitalized for a bit longer. And check out Jimmy Split 77. Get onto Jimmy Split's page, because he is such a gent, and it's so good seeing his stuff. Really great wide spectrum of pieces that he enjoys. And he says, keep safe. Thank you for that, Mark. So this watch sells out, and I think I read something, it sells out in 20 minutes or whatever else. I mean, it's a great cause. I think it's cool. It's very stylized. It's, I don't know. I can't, how can I put words to paper? Reminds me of Crayola, you know. I like what it represents, but it's definitely you can say a collector's item. I don't know if they're going to be reselling these in the future. I don't know what that's going to be about, but who knows? All gone yesterday. Thanks, Truth Fears. Hope he bounces back. Yeah, it really was. It was quite a shock. I heard the news a couple of weeks back and really didn't feel like running a show after hearing the news. So yeah, we can all pray for him. So yeah, I mean, it's just not going. Any more questions about certain models? I do like the fact that we kind of blended the idea of Rainbow Super Ocean, which was most definitely a 57 era piece, into the discussion. I mean, this is probably one of the best pieces to talk about on a show like this, talking about 50s designs, you know. Oh, what do I think of? Paul asking about the Glasuto Original. Let's have a look at that. It's one of, okay, let's get this going. This piece, come on, get the typing hand going. CQ. We can talk about the panorama date as well. But this piece, to me, I'm so impressed by it. So for a bit of context, the video this week, actually, earlier this week, was about reissue dive watches. And this one took center stage for me. Just as I was preparing the video, I wanted to spend like 10 minutes on this watch alone because I find it so cool. Of course, this is not a 50s. It looks like a piece out of the 50s, though. But this is a piece from around 68-ish. And there were a few companies that did have the same aesthetic on their watches, but Glasuto decided to pick up and make this piece theirs. And there's just so many quirky features that I think is great about it. It lines up very much with my Seamaster. I think as a set, having these two would be so good in a collection, you know. Talking about the Panorama, which is the modern variant, one thing I don't like so much is the 41 millimeter size. I've actually seen this compared next to a Submariner, and I think Watchbox did a great video on this, comparing this to a Submariner, and it dwarfs the Submariner in size, which is, did I say that right? The Submariner looks small next to it, and this looks quite big. I think that it could have been tightened up ever so with just a millimeter less, but, and let me just reach Megan's question or mention in the chat, another watch on acid, for sure. Christmas last year. It's so peculiar, right? It really does look like a candy shop or a Crayola set, you know? So talking about this piece a bit, is it 42? I'm pretty sure it's 41. I don't know. You can tell me in the chat. But one thing that I just adore is the date integration. I think what they've done here is so unique and interesting. Very much like a lot of the other pieces, like their, what do they call it? It's the tribute to the Lunga 1, their variant of the Lunga 1. I can't think of the name off the top of my head. I really like the idea of a large date window that's offset, but also allows for a nice open architecture on the dial. Sadly, the size is quite large for the average person, which is a bit of an issue. But overall, really interesting piece. And this to me does feel like a watch of the 50s. I don't know so much about the talking about it and being inspired by a 60s design. It looks like something pretty reminiscent. Another one, a Vacheron 56. I've just realized, top of my head, how is this for a piece? I think someone actually might have mentioned it in the chat. Vacheron 56 is another piece. This is the reason why it reminded me. There is a very clear dial design of that time period that looks exactly the same as the CQ. Pretty funny though, right? And people are saying it's too big. I'm reading the chat talking about sizes and everything. So comparing this to the original 1969 variant, this being a modern take at about 41 mils, this is about 38.5 millimeters. And it just, I would love to get some wear time with this piece. One element that needs to be focused on as well is just the way the end link works on this piece. It doesn't have a rotating center link. These two side links are what rotate. So it means that the watch fits so much nicer, actually. There's less room for failure. You actually have the side links articulating. I don't think you'll be able to see it very well in the picture. Take my word for it. It looks pretty cool. Let me try and get this up and zoom in a bit for you. So this watch measures about 38.5 millimeters in size. Oh, magic mouse, work with me here. And I think it's just it's a great looking piece, something right out of the 50s, even though it doesn't necessarily look like it though, right? So great piece. And I'm going to go back to the 56 because I think it's a watch that needs to be spoken about. Lots of little quirks about this model. Let's pull up the rose gold and have a good look. Oof, that's stunning. Why can't more watches look like this? The large case, the crown guards. Okay, I'm going to catch up with all of you in the chat. Everyone's having a debate alongside. That's great. And any more questions directed to me? So Raymond's saying the JLC Club, being a 50s piece, all square, received an 18 karat gold one in 1975 for my bar mitzvah. Wow, okay, let's pull it up. So the reference is, it's the JLC Club, you said. Okay, let's have a good look. Oh, cool. Here's a 19, I mean, that is, how 70s is that? That is really nice though, I like that. From the 1950s, I would imagine, I mean, here's an automatic. This looks kind of 60s-ish. And I think you also mentioned 18 karat. Let's just get back to the chat while, are there any more examples? See, I'm trying to scan while, let's just leave this up for a sec. I'm trying to scan the chat while catching up. Les is asking a good question about dive watches, GMTs. Being a 50s piece, all square, and received an 18 karat gold case. Well, here's a good example. I don't know if this definitely doesn't look like, this looks more like a 60s transitional piece, but gorgeous looking watch. Going back to the VC though, there's a mention about it being a beauty. I mean, it is something unique, right? I think the way the numerals and batons are placed is something else. It's definitely not a watch for everyone. I think this dial is quite polarizing in the way it's done. I mean, this is a full-on annual calendar. I don't think it's perpetual. It's an annual calendar. JLC, man, they really are such an underrated family. So Les asking a question or mentioning something. Dive dress GMT watches now on repeat and reissue models. Future market is becoming more vulgar and extreme, sad but true. That's something that we definitely have spoken about, and it's questioning where exactly are we going to go in the future, and where exactly are we going to sit. Dress watches, are they going to be prevalent? Are they not? Don't know so much. And the 56 is pretty big. I think it has to be about 41 millimeters, as mentioned. Gosh, it's amazing. I mean, there's so many comments about various things. I'm trying to catch up with all of you as well. Truth is saying, I don't know if I missed you here, saying thank you. I don't know. I'm struggling to keep up with the chat. I've got to take a breather, take another hit of coffee, and keep rolling. Any more suggestions of pieces to pull up if you'd like to see something else? It's so strange running this format again. It's been such a long time since I've done this. So the Monaco, Kenneth, are we talking about the, wow, what's a Langhane Jorg? Thank you, Tip. Tippy brings up the most peculiar pieces. I tell you what. Let's have a look. Oh, wow. Cool. I mean, is this a piece that's inspired from that time? I mean, this is amazing. I think we have spoken about this watch in the past before. It definitely looks like something pretty, it looks kind of like a 40s era, maybe 30s era piece. Crank watch, Globemaster, that's fantastic. Thank you for that, Emily. Globemaster, just next to the Vacheron 56, I think is a pretty good example of a watch that has managed to use elements from all the different time periods. There's some great points about this piece, actually. Let's get Fratello up. When I did a video on this watch, there were some points about just how it's very peculiar, the way the lugs and the case is styled, the bezel and all of those details. I think it takes more inspiration from 60s elements than 50s elements. The Paipan is definitely there, which I think is awesome. Yeah, it's a cool looking piece. Very simple, streamlined, basic, fluted bezel, all the rest. And yeah, I want to catch up with all of you again. I'm definitely learning, trying to remind myself how to use this format. And it's the weirdest thing because I kind of have to keep talking to keep the airtime, to keep the airtime rolling. But this is the Dresden. Okay, and I think I need to pull up another piece that Tippy mentioned a second ago. So the Tag Monaco, we can pull up a Hoya Monaco for sure. So the crank watch. Okay, let's pull that up. It's amazing. I mean, just when I've said this, I say this every single time when I run a show. How amazing is that? Every single time I run a show, I always feel like I've learned something, but there's always something else to stumble upon. So this is quite literally, this is how you wind it. How would you set it? Do you pull out the crank itself to set the time as well? And the Timex, there was mention from BDev. You're talking about the Timex Marlin. I think I saw that a second ago. Oof, love that. Let's get a Timex Marlin up. Because that really was a watch of that time too. No? Let's pull up 1950 just to keep it period correct. I mean, Timex as a brand. Here's another example of a dial that looks just the same as the pieces we've seen earlier. It's incredible. I mean, this format I could say belongs in the 50s, referring back to the CQ that we've spoken about already and everything else. Timex Marlin. I mean, this is definitely a 60s inspired piece with the use of the numerals. You can just tell. But here are some classics. Very, very cluttered, a little bit pixelated, but you get a good idea of just the way the dials were arranged back then. And Raymond, I mean, yeah, really, I haven't done one of these shows in a long time. This whole this format, it's been a while. So I hope it's okay. Hope you're enjoying it. So probably more Timex sold in the 50s than any other watch. Is that so? That's amazing, Bido. Thanks for that. So talking about this Lang Hain Dresden, this was from Truth Fears. I didn't get any more info from you about the piece. I wonder how many mainsprings you'd break with the crank, as Emily says. I mean, that's something. Hey, how would you feel the resistance with the crank? I mean, on one side, it's a bit more. I can't say it's practical wearing a crank on the side of the watch every day, but it's having that fulcrum is a bit easier to wind the watch. It's just you wouldn't really be able to feel the tension of the movement because you're exerting so much more force down on it, you know. Sorry, Tippy, you mentioned it. Thanks. Have I done the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, the actual 50s design? Yeah, we have discussed it in the very beginning of the show, actually. But let's pull it up again. I think if any watch really represents 1950s sports watch design of that time period, I think the 50 Fathoms is like the purest example. Whether the Aqualung, whether we're talking about the mil specs, I just love what I find so fascinating. Another watch that deserves a case study is it's a watch that they didn't know what they were doing. It was so much of an experiment back then, trying to understand numerals and batons and all of those placements, and finally getting something that managed to represent the time period. I mean, this definitely looks like a watch of the time. It hasn't necessarily transitioned that well out of it. Even looking at the modern 50 Fathoms, and of course, it gives me a beautiful pixelated version. This looks like something a bit more modern, but even so, it still looks like a more 50s era piece. I don't know, maybe it's down to the bezel and everything else. But when we look at the modern variant, this is the standard piece. Let's look at the big date. No, see what I'm trying to get at is the numerals around the dial. I think this whole aesthetic is something that has kept it kind of grounded in the 50s in a way. That's something. The Breguet Transatlantic. Oh, that's a goodie, Demetrius. Thank you. Henry Ford started his Model T with a crank. Yeah, that's funny. So let's pull up the Breguet. Did you say the Breguet Transatlantic? There's so many other great pieces as well. I mean, I've got another great watch that we can look at now. Let's pull up the Breguet, but then also talking about the BO, the Breitling Navitimer. How about the Air Command from Blancpain? Another example of a watch. This is most definitely 50s, if I remember right, issued to a certain Air Force. And here we see Type 20 layout. We see something that looks just like a Navitimer in a way, but having the Blancpain name on it. 50 Fathoms, no radium mil-spec. Definitely. I'm looking at, and let's try and get another. I think we're just going to sit on Blancpain for a while. It's definitely one watch that I love talking about. It's got so much to it. It's really an archetype of 50s watch design, which I think makes it so unique. And let's just have a look at a standard. I mean, here's a mil-spec variant. This is better. We get to see, now even this piece, it still looks like, and you know what it is? I've actually thought about it a bit more. It's the proportions that I think has made the watch look dated. White bread, Air Force, rather odd. So yeah, I think it's the proportions of the watch that's made it look quite dated. I think it might be the way the lugs and the bezel, just the case in general, is so dished, you know, very flat and wide, whereas the proportions were tightened up with the later variants. Moving to the air command, I mean, the faux patina, it would be nice to see this watch with just a white dial, white bezel and everything else. Yeah, it's great. Nice looking piece. Where's another example? Breguet Transatlantic. Didn't I mention this? I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. Thank you for that suggestion. Who mentioned it? This was one of the first watches that I actually mentioned in the live 5, and it's being a double split chronograph. Now, this was another example of a watch that looks like it's kind of stuck in the 50s in the way it's styled, the way the numerals are placed and set on the dial. It's peculiar. Brown on brown is nice, though. Nice, tobacco finish, all in all. Yeah, and catching up to Gruen Air Flight is one of the most fascinating watches ever. Let's pull up a Gruen Air Flight. So it's great. I think all in all, we have managed to somehow keep to the topic at hand, which is great. Wow, what a cool looking piece. Thank you for mentioning this. This was from Srijan. What a stunning looking watch. Nice combination. This looks like a reissue by the cleanliness of it altogether. But here's another example of a piece I would most definitely imagine it's a watch of the 50s, maybe transitioning to the 60s in a way when we look at the handset. But the use of the shapes on the dial inside the circles and squares at the quarters, stunning. And something else I wanted to mention about the 50 Fathoms military, what dates it for me is the diamond at the 12 and at the bezel. Something about it screams of a little bit of a different timeline, a different time period, where I think this, again, same. It's peculiar. It's very strange how watches communicate themselves. And this one, on the other hand, you know, you could swear this watch is from the 1970s in the way it's been done. But this is also a 50s era piece, if I'm not wrong. And it's crazy. I mean, there's so much to learn about pieces. Mention about the master control. Let's get that up. Transatlantic. I mean, these serifed numerals on the dial makes quite a difference. So the master control, I was going to talk about it a while back. And the reason why, not master, come on, JLT. The reason why, I think we were looking at just a standard Rolex piece, one of the fancy pieces with the various features, and I recognized the batons on the dial looking eerily similar. I mean, this looks almost exactly like those Rolex those 4-digit references that we saw. And you just look at the placement of everything, the spacing, the moon phase, the day, date, month, everything else placed well. This looks like a watch from that time period for sure. Maybe this watch introduced in the 50s? I wouldn't be surprised if that's the answer. Speaking of which, there's another piece that I want to bring up, and that is the Patek 5212A, which I think our man Russell mentioned as a watch inspired by the 2512, I think the something or other. We look at the case styling and the lugs with the stepping on it. Does look like a piece inspired by that time. It also keeps very 30s in the way it's been arranged and positioned. So Thomas mentioning, this is so many comments, it's so hard to keep up with all of you. The Gruen, the Goldfinger War, I can have a look at that just now for sure. The Bosinger Super Royal from Thomas, let's have a look. Again, it's easier for me to catch up if you tag me in the chat. I can read them a bit simpler. Bosinger Super Royal. Doing pretty well. Watch. I hope I got this right. No, I'm afraid I completely botched that, Thomas. It didn't give me an answer. It's pretty poor. Glycine M and 50s. We've had a look at that already, Thorzy. It's another piece that definitely is of that time. And I mentioned in the discussion around it is that it looks like a watch of the 50s, the over cluttering on the dial. It definitely looks like a piece that remains in that time period. But it's amazing how it's transitioned out and been scaled up in size. Is Rich Buddy picking up a 5212? That is fantastic. So Emily's saying that this watch is too busy. I mean, it definitely is. When we think about what it does, what I enjoy most about it, it's quite a good example of a watch to talk through. See if I can find a closer image of the dial and everything else. Let's see, more resolution. So what I like about it, apart from the date window, which is a bit sad, is that it's a watch that tries to really capitalize on the idea of hands being used to represent elements on the dial, which I think is just great. I wish more dress watches could do that. Similar to the master control that we've looked at. I think the single hand is superb, being able to line up with the data around the dial. So referring to this piece, the busyness is a part of the aesthetic, I think. It's important. It definitely dates the watch for sure, makes it look a lot more old-fashioned. Looks like something we could say coming out of the 30s, possibly the 40s, But then the case, the way the lugs are arranged, very much 50s inspired. So it's great. I mean, there's so many little things. The one element, I think Rich Buddy pointed this out, that the date window kind of just negates the effect that the rest of the dial is trying to do. The date window, I think, was a mistake. The idea that you have this window where everything else is represented by text on the dial. You know what I mean? What do I think about the font? BS, I think it's just part and parcel. It lines up very much with what the watch was trying to be, which was a callback to that time period of handwritten script and everything else. There's just something about how it manages to sit. It's its own beast, which I think is why many people are attracted to it. It's not your typical cliche dress watch. The fact that it's stainless steel also makes it highly collectible. I think it's becoming a hype watch for sure, and it's probably down to it being stainless steel. And Shaitan's saying the 5170 are both Pateks you can pull off casually. Yeah, for sure. You can pull off a 5370 casually. Let's pull up one of those. Another piece that I think would also belong in that 50s era. We've actually mentioned various models that share a similar aesthetic to this piece. So the 5370, we've actually featured on Wrist Shot Week, courtesy of Russell. Oh my goodness, I tell you, this mouse and this Safari not cooperating. We used this watch as, I think it was one of the showstoppers, and it belongs to Russell. This is a platinum double split chronograph, and you could wear this casually every day. No one would know what it is. And it eerily reminiscent of 40s pieces, you could say, Mason saying the VC Historique 1948. Let's have a look at that now. That's cool. That'll be nice. Let's get away from the Bossinger. Sorry about this, Thomas. VC Historique. I just love the American. It immediately jumps to the 1921 American. I love this watch. I think it's just so quirky and cool. Let's pull up the 1948. The American, I think, is its own beast. So I haven't actually looked at this piece before. What a fantastic offering. Okay, what do we look at first? Do we look at Romans or do we look at numerals? This is great. Who mentioned this? This is from Mason or Meeson. Did I say it right? Meson. Single split, not double split. Am I wrong there? Really? Oh, right. You're right. Double split. I'm thinking of datograph. It's just one split. It's a split second chronograph. Thanks for that, Zane. I am a little bit backwards. I'm thinking of Lunger. When Lunger brought out the double and the triple splits, it really turned people's attention, But this piece as an everyday wearer reminds me of that Longines we spoke about in the beginning. Similar, 1946 era, just as we were transitioning to the 50s. But the Historique 1948, we see again the same styling that we saw shared between the Master Control, the Rolex that we looked at, those Phillips auction pieces, Sotheby's, and MA asking, is the Universal Pole Router 50s? Apparently 59, round about there, that's when they were introduced, according to, I think Emily mentioned that she has one from 59. The Longines 13ZN, later 30CH, King of Cludge. I don't know. Me and references, I am appalling. Anyway, looking at this combination, really clean. And I also love the use of red accents on the date windows inside there. But then if we then transition to a variant without Romans and numerals instead, where's a good example? Here we go. Here are two examples. These are renders, but you get an idea. It's incredible. I mean, I think when I look at this cream dial, all of a sudden I bring up this little PRS. We have another example of cream dial, cream finish, blued hands. I mean, it's nuts how there is a relationship shared with so many factors. It's almost as if every time period had its own approach. I also see the numerals on the dial. Reminds me of pilot watches of that time period as well. It's crazy. I mean, I think the lugs have definitely aged the watch for sure. Same with the numerals on the dial. Blue Shirt saying, I love the VC Historique 42 triple calendar. It's my next on my list. It is a stunning watch. I have never looked at this in depth. I can be honest and tell you that. This is the first time I've actually seen this watch up close and focused on it. Thank you for the suggestion. I think it was Mason who suggested it. So just blue hands and all those little details really tied in together. Also like the idea that the Romans are sticks and not serifed or anything else. They're very plain. Here's another good example. Maybe you can see that in more detail there. They look a lot less polarizing. The lugs are also gorgeous. What a stunning looking watch. This is definitely one that belongs in the 50s. It looks like a piece of that time period, you know. And Neville saying the Smiths is great. Yeah, at the beginning of the show, I talk about it a bit more. But there's a lot to talk about with the Smiths brand and everything else as we go. Jamie, thank you so much for the super chat. You've been sending in some great watches for Wrist Shot Week, if I remember right. And come next week, we're going to do it again. So this was a bit of a break, a bit of a change of pace to look at other things for a while. Look at watches that were inspired around 50s elements and motifs. So what is the real conclusion we can come to for the show? It's kind of like you can very easily see a watch that belongs in the 50s just by looking at it, the way it's positioned, scaled, sized. Some of the proportions are a bit peculiar. I see this and I think this belongs in the 50s for sure. This watch has similar cues, this master control, but has in a way managed to transition away from it. Maybe it's down to the numerals on the dial, for example. Maybe it's down to just the placement, everything being symmetrical and clear. Then we move to the 50 fathoms. This watch looks like something out of the 70s, not something out of the 50s. I hope I'm saying that right. I feel like this is a 50s era, but it might be later on. I don't know. But just in general, the 50 fathoms to me looks like a watch that still belongs in the 50s in a way, just because of the spacing, the placement on the dial and everything else. And then this watch again, another example that belongs in that timeline. And so it goes. I mean, this discussion could go on for like 40 hours and we still wouldn't be able to get down and nail the brass tacks and get to the details fully. But I hope there have been some good examples here to share with all of you, my thought process, you know. So Michael's saying VC or the JLC triple calendar. Ooh, good question. You know what? I would take the VC over the JLC, personally. For JLC, I would much rather pick up something like a Reverso from them. This VC is quite something. Very special. I don't know how new this watch is. It was brought out when? Maybe 2018, 2019? No idea. Stunning looking watch though. Look at the thinness of it. Incredible. It's just unbelievable. I mean, they've pretty much rescanned the watch. This very much lines up with what we were talking about with Rolex bringing out a re-edition of their pieces. Pretty sure they've CT scanned this piece and pushed it forward. Just the way the case has been finished and everything else. It's amazing. Looks like it's even using welded lugs, which is very unique. If you look at those seams there. Yeah. The 50 was introduced in 53. The 59 fathoms. Yeah. So, yeah, what other pieces could we look at? We've looked at the 5370, which is also a gem. The Zenith Chronomaster triple. So I think we've done enough talking about 50s inspired. Let's just, for the next, I don't know, half an hour or so, talk about pieces in general. If you have any questions, tag me in the chat asking about various models if you'd like to compare A and B together. You can't scan metal, it shatters in the x-rays. I'm thinking that then CT scanning is a different process, right? I don't know. Me and technology. It's great though. Can't CT scan. Is that so? Is that so? How do they scan them then? It's not. It can't be CT scanning and X-rays are slightly different though, right? Oh, Raymond, I remember you mentioned your email was one of the last actually, talking about the Tudor P01. Now we're transitioning into 60s territory. He's just picked up a Tudor P01. It's a peculiar beast, right? It is such a strange model. I made a video about this a few months back, just talking about where it sits. I said it's a prototype that's important. And Raymond, thank you for the mention. I said that the P01 is a prototype that's important because it shows Tudor brand as a modern brand is trying to be a bit more experimental with their pieces that they choose. And it's nice to see it come to fruition. How about marine chronometers? Neville, you're perfectly right. What's a good example of a marine chronometer? Longines did some good ones, didn't they? Let's have a look. See, again, in my history, sometimes it comes, sometimes it goes. I mean, as far as watches go, we did talk about what's the model? The IWC Portuguese. We could pull that up again, actually. It's an idea. IWC Portuguese. And this piece did have its setting in the sea, used by Navy and the rest, right? It was really a seagoing instrument, not so much the chronograph, was it? I know they also had a chronograph and just a standard piece. What a great name for it, a peculiar beast. Yeah, I mean, it really is. The P01 it's a strange animal. But I like the fact, the one thing that I dig about it is that it represents prototyping. The real conclusion to my argument about the P01 video was that it's a watch that manages to show us the process. It shows us a little bit of a different step in the watch development phase. Because normally we are so used to just receiving that. We're used to receiving the finished product, final, perfect, the way everyone wanted it to be, clean and clear to the last detail. Very seldom do we get a watch that you could almost say it's unfinished, and Eric's saying at least they tried. I mean, that's the thing. They show off the process behind what goes into making a prototype watch, which I think is quite endearing. It's from a design front, from a developmental point of view, I think it's quite unique, makes quite a difference. Now, as for an everyday wearing watch, that's another point. I don't know how anyone has gotten on wearing this watch every day. If you enjoy it, if the size is okay, if the scale is good, but all in all, let's get a bigger picture. Again, I'm sorry if the scale of the images aren't the best. Sadly, Safari keeps pulling away from me every time I zoom into a piece. But definitely a strange animal. Okay, and let's have Nick saying, have I worn the piece? Oh, talking to Raymond, yeah. Versace asking, I wish Rolex could put a Hulk bezel on a 116610. To make it like a transitional Kermit. Very interesting. How fast with the black? Okay, great questions. I'm loving these. More directed questions. It lets me think a bit more. So let's pull up the GMT. That's great. And nice question. So the question comes from, there's another question beforehand. Let me get to that first. Hold on a sec. Watch time. Load up, please. Do me a favor. Where's a good picture? Watch finder. Okay. I'm going to leave this here and get another shot up. I wish Rolex could put a Hulk bezel on a 116. So the idea here, we're trying to get the effect of the 16610 LV, but with a super case and a ceramic bezel. The one thing that really irks me about the Hulk Submariner is not the dial, but the bezel. I think the bezel it's too bright for what it is. The way they managed to address the Kermit here so well was the use of the green. I think it's a lot more toned down. It still is very bright. There's no arguing with that, but it's less in your face. One thing I love about the Hulk is the gorgeous dial itself. Great question, though. I mean, this could be something they essentially do when they bring out squint your eyes, and here's your example of the model that you would see with a black dial. This might be something very realistic that Rolex maybe does on their 70th anniversary for the sub or whatever else. Squint your eyes and you can see what a black dial might look like on the piece. Is it really necessary though, you know? So how fast is Shaitan asking me? I need to clear my throat. Actually, I'm going to grab a fisherman's friend because, as most of us know, the show is usually sponsored by a fisherman's friend because I lose my voice quite often. Very good question. Oh, and James Khan saying, interesting contrast between the Blancpain Verlet, oh my goodness, versus the 50 fathoms. Oh, wow. James Khan, I need to bring that up as well. I have no idea what that reference is about, but I definitely want to look at it. So let's have a look. Blancpain, it's going to take a little while for me to get everything written out. Moon phase, I'm pulling up. No. These are stunning, though. That's another small detail. Blancpain makes dress watches, something that everyone should know and enjoy. There's lots of stuff that we just don't hear about behind the scenes. I mean, here's another example. That is beautiful. I don't know so much about the wavy date hand, but what a stunning looking piece. Talking about dress watches and everything. So Shaitan asking me how fast would the Tudor GMT sell out? Like if it was put into a Black Bay 58 case. I think I had this argument when talking about predictions for Baselworld and everything. The big downside is that the Tudor Black Bay GMT in this configuration is its own animal at this point. And if they were to suddenly drop this format into a 58, the attention to this GMT would be reduced quite a lot, I think. So they definitely won't do that for a while. I don't think that'll be something on their cards for a while. But in saying that, it would sell very well, very quickly, because it's much more true to the original, what is it, the 6542 we've actually looked at the beginning of the show. And asking, Zane mentioning, the Patek, what's the reference? Patek 5531. Have a look at that. Oh, wow. So when we're referring back to, and this is what I find hilarious, actually, when you're dealing with the higher end watches, so the resolution gets worse and worse. The quality of the images sort of linger, I guess, because they're not focused to the mainstream, you know. This watch looks like something out of the 50s for sure. We'll talk about this in a second. What else were we talking about? Talking about this Blancpain piece, and I've missed the question. Zenith Chronomaster Demetrius. Again, if you guys can tag me in the chat, it'll be much easier for me to catch it quickly. The A384 and versus the, what did you say? Just the Chronomaster Revival. What's your opinion about the Zenith Chronomaster Revival El Primero? So this is it. This is the piece. I think it's one of the best watches that Zenith has brought out in a long time. I guess I'm biased because I love reissue watches. I think they have their own genre, their own place. Speaking of which, we actually featured one of these at the Wrist Shot Week last weekend. It was one of the watches on the show. And everything from scale, from size to presence, everything I think has been hit really well. The fact that it mirrors the original down to the T, it just looks great. And Pilot Style saying, Watchbox has confirmed we will get a Tudor release this year. Which Tudor thinks will be their instant bestseller? Oh, that's cool. Interesting. I heard something similar. It's funny how we can sort of predict various things. I'm sorry about the Blancpain story. I should get back into it and talk about the brand. Now I'm going on a different tangent. It's funny how we can predict these things from brands and families. I actually know, I have a bit of inside information about what the piece could be. That I've actually heard speak about it. I've heard some inside information from a few people that this is going to be recreated. And this is going to be an instant seller. That's what I've heard, at least. If we're talking about re-editions and reissues, let's be honest, a proper Ranger in the size and everything, this would sell like what? Like sliced bread, whatever. Tudor home plate 50th anniversary, Tudor bronze with Black Bay bezel plate. It's fab. Talking about bronze watches, that's a story for another time for sure. And I've answered the question about the A384, and I think it's just great. It really is a nice piece. I would, if I had the money in the world right now, I'd be picking up one of these watches. Not just the scale and proportions that do it for me. It's the Panda hotcakes. Thank you, Kenneth. It's not just the proportions and the scale that does it for me. It's the Panda aesthetic. It's just so clean and clear. You can read the time easily. You can use the stopwatch easily. Its presence on the wrist is just so. It's not too big, not too small. The white dial makes it look bigger. The Gay Frere, how do you say the name? Gay Frere bracelet. They've quite literally recreated that as well, which is amazing. So yeah, Demetrius, I think I answered your question there. And so the Tudor Ranger, this is what I've heard speak about. And did I mention this I'm pretty sure I mentioned this in predictions at the beginning of the year. Something so unique about this watch, just the way it's placed and scaled. This one is much more of a even older callback. I think this looks much more like, they had the straight end links. This is the 1016 case that everyone wants to see, there's just so many more details. It's great. This is when I love discussing stuff. Now that I'm kind of warmed up, we can focus on more diverse subjects around this. The smiling dial, that's something else. But that's one of the guesses. I would be very interested in seeing that watch released. I'm pretty sure that would fly off their shelves. But then at the same time, they could maybe play it safe and release a root beer styled GMT, maybe. Who knows? It's all open to interpretation. But seeing the Tudor Ranger being re-released again, it would make headlines. Let's be real. I think it would be popular. I don't know if they've phased out the original Ranger or if it is still in stock yet. Might need to know that. A Tudor B02. Ooh, B01, B02. I'm getting confused now with the P01 B. Sorry, Palestine, I'm not with you. I'm a bit slow. Been running the show now for like 2 hours, 10 minutes. Yeah, but it's great. And talking about the 5531 that I think Zane mentioned, this piece eerily looks very much like a 50s era model for sure. Everything down to, I think the handset also gives it away. This is amazing. So this is a full-on minute repeater. What a beautiful case. So it's a minute repeater world time. That's no, and it's got a full enamel painted dial. Oof, I much prefer the sailing in the background on Lake Geneva. That looks so clean. Okay, so Raymond's saying, now for something completely different. Seiko Alpinist. These are fantastic daily beaters. Yeah, I agree. I think they are superb. And if we refer to the latest, the 2020 variant, I have a feeling that the 2020 model is going to be less, should I say, polarizing compared to the standard green dial. Nice seeing the use. And actually, looking at this piece and referring back to us talking about 50s era watches, this looks like something straight out of that time too. The sharp teeth for batons, the cathedral hands, the crown being set at the 4 o'clock position. All of these elements make it look like something out of that time, which is quite ironic. Interesting, though. I think this piece on its own definitely does. I really enjoy it much more, I would say, than the green dial. But saying that, they have done some good stuff. White dial as well. They've done some really interesting things with these new pieces that have just come out, all under the Prospex names. So I guess they're going to be a lot more expensive than usual. So Wristwatch saying, I wonder if growth in Tudor sales has contributed to the lack of Rolex stock. I don't know. It's just so annoying hearing, how can a company, I just don't understand how a company can do that, as a brand that people put so much of their money into. I hate the fact that they're forcing demand out of people. So the SARB 017, as mentioned by Raymond, I think the green, what I like is the green represents alpines and mountaineering. But then again, the gold and green together, dress watch, sports watch, it just clashes. It gets a little bit messy, at least for my taste. The thing is, this watch is very much appreciated and loved in the community, and it's its own beast. Again, it's its own animal that the YouTube space, social media has lapped up. They love this piece. Nice bracelet. That looks like it comes off a Zin. It's really cool. But yeah, there's so much to discuss. If there are any more questions around pieces, I think I saw mention about something about, hold on, further up. No, I missed it. Oh, the 6451 Milgauss, a brilliant 50s watch. Thomas, superb. Let's get that up. Let's get that up. This is the most quirkiest piece. I highly recommend 6451. Highly recommend you have a look at a video that I put out a couple of months back called the Einstein Rolex. And I talk just about how quirky the Milgauss line is and what it really represents. This is great. Thomas, this is a superb watch to highlight for the show. So this is just when we saw the chronograph bezel introduced, you know, and just looking at the batons at the quarters, very 50s, the lightning bolt hand. I mean, can you get any more 50s than that, you know? Okay, I'm going to scroll down a bit more. James Conn mentioning the Patek 5575. Let's get that up. Let's see. Patek 5575. Another, oof, just insane. It's a beautiful looking watch. Real black tie watch, you know. Look at those lugs. Does the other reference, don't tell me I've left it. I've actually lost it. The other reference doesn't have lugs like these, does it? Look at those turned in lugs. Stunning piece. Really nice. So there was a limited edition 1959 blue, Raymond. Were you referring to the Patek? Sorry, I've got to try and catch up with everyone else. So yeah, so talking about the Milgauss, let's get back to it. This is such a fantastic 50s piece that Thomas has mentioned. And really, when you look at it, how it transitioned from this to the 1019 is a funny story. And I recommend looking at the history a bit more if you're interested. The 1019, here's an example, is the next phase, which is also beautiful. Seeing this with a black dial is stunning. But as a 50s watch with all of its quirks, this definitely takes the cake. No one knew what the hell they were doing. This was just all guesswork, you know? And Michael's saying, I wish Omega could put the olive dial on the 38mm Aquaterra. Those olive dial Aquaterras that have just come out. So let's have a look at that again. Aquaterra olive. I actually wanted this to be used. I think I mentioned this. It was used on a video. I can't remember when. A while back. It was definitely featured on the video, but these are brand new that have just been released. And anything with olive drab gets me, you know. When it comes to talking about appeal, mass appeal from the community, great looking piece. Very nice combination. It would be nice to see it on a slightly smaller watch. Some people just can't pull off 41 mils. It's just the reality. So I'm someone who can't pull off 41 mils. I can tell you that much. 38.5, 39 mils, 40 mils is my limit. Look at that thing. Oh my goodness. And this watch, the Aquaterra line, again calls back to 50s inspired motifs. It looks like something out of that time period. Everything from the hands definitely took its inspiration from the Seamasters and Railmasters from the 57 era. And you can see that clear as day when you look at the aesthetics. But they've really nailed it. I love that green dial. And Raymond's saying Rolex sub Hulk. Olive is the new blue. BS, I think it is. That's a very good statement. Olive is becoming such a popular color scheme. And maybe it's because it just manages to blend in more with what we wear nowadays. Let's pull up the Aquanaut Olive. It's always nice seeing it. I mean, this is the true hype watch of all time, right? I really like it. The hand grenade, it's great. It's a versatile color because it's, how do we say it? I mean, you notice that generally we tend to wear green quite often. Most of us like to wear olive drab on our clothes and whatever else. It's a nice color to have with cars and vehicles. This if we talk about 50s elements and inspirations, it's funny how military always tends to go back into civilian use eventually. It returns to civilian use eventually. So the use of olive drab in clothing has been a popular trend thanks to 1940s, 50s Vietnam era clothing. We're now seeing this trend arrive with these pieces. It's a very versatile color. It's not black. It's not boring. Shout out saying wearing olive chinos as we speak. I mean, I wore olive slacks today going out for a walk. So, I mean, it's just one of those things. And as a combination, one thing that I really, actually, this sums it up perfectly. One thing I really like about this watch in this configuration is it looks just like a field watch now. It looks like it really celebrates the field watch aesthetic. I have a theory that the Aquanaut was inspired by field watch designs. I just need to pull up the Smiths. I'm wearing the hell out of a Smiths W10 over the last few days. And you get to see some interesting little cues and points. I've been enjoying this watch so much over the last few days because it's just so versatile. Look at where do we begin? Begin with the rail dial. This piece is actually eerily reminiscent of Dirty Dozen watches from back in the day, I think, just with the rail track running around. You look at the rail track, the numerals around it, the loom plots, the hams, okay, seconds hand, all of that. And then we return to the Aquanaut. You see a similar aesthetic, which I find quite peculiar, a little bit of a groundbreaker. Maybe this is where they got their inspiration from in the first place. I don't know. Who knows? Olive drab Hoya 510. Thanks, James Con. Let's pull it up and have a look. And we were just talking about the Alpinist, which is also olive. It's nuts, right? Hoya 510. And actually, speaking of which, wouldn't we say that 50s, speaking of olive drab, wow, this is cool. Did this come with an olive drab finish? This looks like all titanium. Oh, wow. That's quite nice. Interesting finish, almost like a gunmetal. Speaking of olive drab, didn't it really become popular after the 40s, into the 50s period? That's something we could consider. So even the color scheme, even the olive drab color scheme really became popular during the 40s and then onwards. It's hilarious. I mean, all these little influxes and influences that happened around then. How about a Daniels anniversary? We're talking George Daniels from Kenneth. I could definitely pull up a George Daniels. They call it anniversary. We're talking about Jack Daniels. I'm just going to say George Daniels. I don't know what the anniversary is. This millennium, is that maybe the one you're talking about? Oh, these pieces are just gorgeous. I don't know I think you might have been referring to Jack Daniels. I don't know. Maybe I need to hit the booze to keep going, keep the show rolling. How can you not like a piece like that? Stunning. 1016 Explorer, Chi-Town. It's amazing how we haven't once touched on the Explorer and just where it sits and what it kind of represents as another piece of 50s design. I actually try to avoid it as much as possible during this talk because it's too safe, you know. Spoken about it so many times about the Explorer's significance. What I find funny is that this watch too doesn't look like something that really has transitioned out of the 50s so much. I think it's a watch that it has its own presence of that time. It seems to sit in the 50s, 60s era very well. But the numerals, I think the numerals save it in a way too. So mentioned using up camouflage paint like early Saabs, yeah, for sure. Jack Daniels in my glass right now. We should talk about 50s Oyster Perpetuals, pilot style. We can. And then I think in the next 10 minutes, we can call it a wrap because we've been rolling for a long time. That's another sad thing is that, well, not a sad thing for you guys, but for me, I'm going to be running these things into the ground. And since I don't have a schedule to follow, I end up just talking for hours on end. So again, here's some examples of Oyster Perpetuals. Bear in mind that this is the kind of watch that Hillary and Norgay would have worn up Everest. And this is kind of where we transitioned from the Oyster Perpetual to the real Explorer. A few other elements, a few other names around that line. But there's so many. I mean, just the bubble backs and all of those pieces of the time. It's incredible just how watches of that era, this is gorgeous. I mean, would you consider this a sports watch nowadays? Not really. Still nice and clean. Watch to pair with the Olive Series 1 Land Rover. Ooh. IWC. I actually paired IWC with Land Rover, didn't I? No, I didn't. I paired Breitling with Land Rover. Oof. I would pair, you know, really, if it was me, I've actually spoken about the watch already. I would be pairing a Mark 11 with a Series 1 Land Rover. I mean, that's just so fitting, you know? A Mark 1 Landy with a Mark 11. Oof. Works well. It'd be a nice pair. We could talk about pairing. That's the next step, by the way. Part 1 of the watch and car video is that we're talking about watch brands and car brands together. But part 2, we can talk about specific watches and specific cars, which should be a lot of fun. There's a Land Rover Zenith. I didn't know that, BS. Really didn't. But the Mark 11, what a funky piece of its time, for sure. Mentioning about George Daniels and the anniversary, I don't know if you're referring to this, but this is definitely playing on original watchmaking motifs. You can see just how different the timeline was then. We're looking at very Breguet, original traditional English watch styling. And I wish I could get some bigger images for everyone to see. Will that work? Oof, there we go, as an example. So on the left, we have the date. On the right, we have the seconds. At the top, we have a power reserve. And such a nice asymmetry and placement of everything. So nice and clean. Yeah, that's great. It's nice for a change that everyone's listening to me talk. And I can't believe there's like 250 of you watching and joining in. Here I was thinking, for a while, I was thinking it was just going to be a very casual, like 50 people joining, and it would just be a talk along for a time. But this really does feel like quite a legitimate production. So thank you, everyone who has contributed and been a part of the show and asked questions and so on. This is really how the live shows began all those months ago, when the page started, when we started getting into live shows more methodically, So any more questions about pieces, or should we wrap up very soon? What are we thinking? Is there anything else you would like to compare and contrast? All I can say is that over the next few weeks, I'm going to be having a few diverse videos, one on the Datejust. Great question, by the way, talking about Datejust and where it sits. Watches and cars is coming up soon. No date watches should be coming up on Tuesday. And then I have a review and the unveiling of a prototype watch. Oh, wow, Brick Lane. I have to check out that piece. My favorite. Brilliant. Breguet Diver. This is the one that's going to end the show, actually. This everyone has to stay for, because it's just insane. Insanely beautiful. And you wouldn't believe that this was actually a real watch that existed. There's 2 renditions of this. Exceptionally rare. Breguet dive watches. One variant with the dial laid out like this. Another dial with numerals all over it. So let's just talk around this for a second. So again, I say in the coming weeks, come 2 weeks' time, I'm going to be unveiling a prototype and reviewing it on the channel, which is going to be so cool. I'm so excited. The first time I've actually had a company, so it's a Smith's watch, I can give that information. A company actually reach out to me and show off a new watch, literally the only one in the world at this point in time. It's 2 prototypes, and come August, September, they will be available. And I'm not going to say anything about the watch in particular, but all I can say is that I think many will be chomping at the bit for one because it's beautiful. And it's taken over a year of development to get it the way he wanted it to be. This is Eddie, the owner of Time Factors. Yeah, pilot style. It is about 4 or 5 times better than any Squale could ever be. It's taken Eddie a year of discussion, and it's taken about 11 iterations for it to arrive at what it finally is. It's very exciting. So I look forward to premiering that. But let's get into the Breguet, the last watch of the show, I think, because we've been chatting about this for a long time. Eric Bell saying Lotus, lots of trouble, usually serious, and Jean. Lotus I paired with what did I pair with? I paired Lotus with Zenith, actually. And there's a reason why. Talking about the movement and Lotus as a team, Formula One, and where their watches have come around. A Smith's with hands made from Sir Edmund Hillary's bones. Ooh, Bourganish, you're getting close. You're getting warm. No. I can actually, for those of you who have stayed behind, I think we can actually, I'll give you an example of what it might be. That's a close enough example of what it might be. I have been hinting on the show a few times about what it is. Nicknamed the Fisherman's Friend. No. So for those of you who are watching, I'm sure there aren't many, but it is essentially a very, it represents this watch in a way, similar way. Mallory's watch, Eric Bell. So I'll leave it at that. And when you see the review, I think you'll be quite impressed. It's a stunning watch. But anyway, let's get back into this Breguet. Now this diver, it's a 1/6 something or other. I'll never get the name right. Speaking of Fisherman's Friend, I've just put another one in my mouth, so excuse me. There's just a few variants, and there's literally only like one of these. Wow, this is amazing. 300 by Event Watches. Look this up. Maybe these are still available. It's a stunning looking piece. This is such a good way to actually end the show, because this watch is also late 50s, early 60s inspired. You get to see these numerals on the dial, the placement. What I do like is how the circular hand corresponds with the plots on the dial. The bezel is so peculiar, 3, 6, 9. But then we jump to the creme de la creme. I mean, that is just gorgeous. It's just so funky and strange. The fact that it says Breguet on the dial, very unique and interesting. Breguet should make something like that, not that marine BS. I think the marine stands, it has a good, I've spoken about the marine before. Let's end off with the Breguet marine. I think that'll be quite nice as well. What I like is that they have managed to, well, the modern marines, I think, are a bit heavy duty. I mean, this is a bit excessive, but the titanium marines, I think they are, the 5517s, I like that they've managed to take the dress and the sports together and mesh them around in places. Look at some inspirations like the crown. I've done a video on this piece, the 5517 Breguet Marine. Anyway, getting back to this, I think this is one of the most interesting divers that has ever come out of this time period that we've been speaking about, the 50s. B-Dev, I think you might know something more than most, but it's a pretty cracking name you've chosen there. Yeah, so it's a gorgeous combination of parts. I love the numerals. The small bezel, again, we must remember, this is what's so important about 1950s watch design, was that it was all an experiment. Everything was guesswork. Everything was just throw it in and see what happens. I'm pretty sure nothing of this was original to Breguet. They just put their name on it. Maybe they weren't even using their own movements in this piece. But I just find it so funny that at this stage, when we've looked at a lot of watches, some have managed to really surpass the 50s, others grounded in the 50s. This one looks like something grounded in the 50s by looking at the skinny bezel. Numerals on the dial, looks great, nice and clean. But this is literally, I think the story behind it is it's just one of like 3 ever made. They were very much like prototypes back then. And one of the clearest examples, so legible, clean and clear, very much just like a dress watch, you know? And I can imagine the size of this piece must have been minuscule. But it's fascinating. I mean, we could look it up quick. Let's go into Forbes. Please don't give me advertising. Oh, no. I just did something really wrong, didn't I? Christie's auction. What else do they say about it? Huge estimate for it, for sure, because it's very rare. Important watches. Yeah, I mean, it was literally just a watch that was uncovered and no one had ever seen or heard about it before, but it's made quite a splash. I think it must, I mean, these are priceless at this point in time, for sure. Beautiful pieces. And Brick Lane says, Breguet needs a rendition of these beauties. I believe it too. I think they should think about bringing these back because they would make a killing, an absolute killing. The thing is, though, they would put such a premium on the watches too. Would people pay that kind of price for just a simple, basic diver that looks more like a dress watch nowadays? In any case, Thomas, thank you for the super chat, man. It's always a pleasure doing this. I love these shows. I love having you all here that I can just share these thoughts with, and I hope you took something away from whatever my ramblings were about during the show. I don't even know where it went, but it managed to stay on track of sorts, you know. And come next week, we will do another wrist shot week again, if I have the strength and energy after preparing all these review videos that are coming up. But yeah, it's been a hell of a good time. We've been chatting for 2.5 hours, and it's been a joy. So I think what I'm going to do, what's next week's topic? Referring to wrist shot week, it'll just be a simple submission show. Depending, I think what I can do is I can judge this show by the likes on this video. How about that? Something like, if we get 150 likes for this video, then I will definitely repeat this exercise again. I know it's not for everyone. It's a bit more, I don't know, we could say intimate. I address you a little bit more. It's more of a presentation and a lecture than anything else. Where wrist shot week is more of a collaborative exercise where we get to see what we all have. Friends said it was a waste of time. Oh, well, I mean, I can agree there too, if that's your opinion. for me, it's a time when I can express my thoughts over a longer period of time. You can get into my head a bit more, maybe. And instead of just being a script that I read off, we can kind of engage and involve ourselves a bit more with the subject. You giving me suggestions to look up, as well as sharing opinions and perspectives. You know, this is how the channel began. The live shows began just like this a good year ago. And it's funny going back to it. It's been a long, long time, me getting used to this format again. So yeah, I would say if this hits 150 likes, then maybe we can do it again, because that's kind of the audience I'm expecting. 150 people watching the show, getting into the more diverse philosophical related topics. I kind of think of them on the fly, and if anything sticks out to me, then that's where it develops. But I mean, it's a lot of fun. I always enjoy it. The time always flies for me. I mean, I'm high on coffee at the moment, but you know, thanks, Art. Oh, it was a joke. Okay, never mind. Really, it's okay. And all of you can honestly say thank you so much for joining. It's so peculiar that I can just sit and ramble, and people like to be a part and listen to what's going on. It's very humbling. That's all I can say. Doing what I do is a very humbling exercise, and it's seriously appreciated. It's almost like when I wake up and realize that whatever I say has some kind of impact. You know, it influences someone and means something. It really does. And it's always a pleasure. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the screen sharing. How do I do that efficiently? That's pretty decent. And thank you all for joining. I mean, there's still 230 of you here, which is a pleasure. We've been running for about 2.5 hours at this point, and you guys are great. I mean, the contributions, you being a part of the show, is what makes it fun, because otherwise, I'd actually love it to be a time when I could just imagine me doing a live show with no one in the audience and me just talking to myself. That'd be a lot of fun. I would enjoy it. Sometimes it can be quite pressurizing when there's like 400 people watching at once, you know? Anyway, you guys are great. Tunku, I haven't seen you, but thank you for joining. I can imagine it's early where you are in the world. And everyone else, you're all great. Thank you so much. And please enjoy your weekends. Your weekend, should I say, your Sunday, wherever you are in the world. And yeah, taught us many valuable lessons. Confucius is a great man. So yeah, as always, be prepared for more videos next week. After this evening's hangover, I'm going to do some more editing and prepare Tuesday's video on no-date watches. Thursday, we'll be looking at watches and car brands, which should be fun. And then over the course of next week, preparing an unveiling of a prototype. It's a very unique and interesting one. So to all of you who have been a part of the show, thank you so much. I really didn't expect this kind of feedback and this amount of audience joining in, actually. In fact, I expected like 100 people maybe at most. So always a pleasure. No dates. Yeah, Buganish, that's it, man. I'm basically going to talk about 5 reasons why I think you should appreciate and at least have one no-date watch in your collection. And it's a few elements that people don't talk about enough that I think it's very philosophical, actually. We talk a bit more about time and in the moment and depth and all that, whatever. So to all of you who are saying thank you all again for joining and being a part of the show. And it's been a pleasure, as always. Look after yourselves. Have a great Sunday. Keep yourselves busy. And if you are in the Northern Hemisphere and you're getting some great weather, go out and enjoy the sun, because who knows how long it's going to be. And Thomas, thank you again for the super chat, man. Really, it's just fantastic. You've all been great. See you soon. Catch you next week. And Wrist Shot Week is happening next week, Saturday. So send your submissions to my email. It should be in the comment section of the video, or the whatever it's called, the drop-down box. And yeah, see you then. Cheers, everyone.